It's one of the most polarizing games to be created in the last decade of gaming. Its haters, of which there are many, will tell you that it's a disappointing sequel, a slow and sluggish nightmare that punishes the players in ways that are arbitrary, unfair and contrived, and generally one of the worst games to grace the gaming medium. On the opposite side, however, its fans and admirers will praise the game for its sheer creativity and ingenuity, its excellent build variety, setting and exploration, and its plethora of content available to delve into. How could a game that comes after the universally beloved Dark Souls 1, made by the world-renowned From Software, a company that would then go on this incredible 4-game streak, split the player base into two? Welcome everybody, I'm your host Adobo, and today we'll be delving into Dark Souls 2, where it shines as well as where it goes off the rails. Now keep in mind, I am one person speaking about my experiences with the game and the community, so it probably won't align with your experiences. But that's the great part about discussion, isn't it? Gathering different viewpoints about things we're passionate about. So feel free to comment your thoughts and opinions about Dark Souls 2 as a whole, or the community, or whatever you know. What did you have for breakfast today? Let us know in the comment section. Without further ado, let's begin this discussion as we take a look back on Dark Souls 2, a game filled with highs and lows. As it's the only version of Dark Souls 2 that I've played, most of my discussion will be centered about the Scholar of the First Sin edition. I don't really have the game on a PC, nor do I own any last gen console at the moment. By that I mean PS3 or Xbox 360. But if I ever do, I'll be sure to play the original to see how my experience differs. But from what I've gathered and heard from folk online, I can tell myself that there were a lot of changes made when releasing the Scholar of the First Sin edition. For one, they introduced the NPC Aldia, who plays a pivotal role in your journey now, as well as the story behind the kingdom of Drangleic, being the elder brother of the lifeless King Vendrick. Scholar also went on to make him the new final boss of the game, albeit optional if the player has spoken to him every time in full as he makes his appearances throughout the game. Another change that was made was the decision to include all the bonus DLC content for free upon purchase of this edition, making it available for any player that plays this version to partake in. Scholar of the First Sin also features improved graphics and performances compared to the original release of Dark Souls 2, of course, it was on the next gen at the time. The game benefits from enhanced lighting effects, improved textures and smoother frame rates, resulting in a more visually immersive and polished experience for players as a whole. Lastly though, the most infamous and talked about changes that Scholar made was its differing enemy placements and items throughout the game. This repositioning of foes and objects was presumably to keep the veterans and returning players hot on their toes, but it had more of a negative effect with the community as it went on to cause heightened frustrations for a lot of players due to the spammy nature of some areas or the illogical placements that came as a result. I'll go into more detail about these specific issues later on in the video when I get to certain areas, but for now let's talk a little about Dark Souls 2's development process. So, you may have heard the phrase before, Dark Souls 2 is the black sheep of the Souls series. I'm sure you can infer what that means from the sentence alone, but if not, then a black sheep is essentially someone that's a disgrace to their family. You know, not a particularly nice thing to say, obviously. But that is how Dark Souls 2 is often referred to by the community. It just goes to show how legendary of a series it is in a way, because a lot of the people, the same people who call it a black sheep, will go on to state that it's still a great game, just that it isn't up to the standards of its siblings. There is a pretty big thing to consider though when taking into account the quality of Dark Souls 2, and that's Hidetaka Miyazaki. You know, this man, the legend who was the head when it came to creating every game in the series. He was in fact not that involved in the creation and development process of Dark Souls 2. The head role was transferred over to Tomohiro Shibuya and Yui Tanimura, as Miyazaki and a lot of the staff involved with the production of Demon Souls and Dark Souls were already working on Bloodborne, which excellent game to put your focus on if I do say so myself. So the duo of Shibuya and Tanimura were co-leading the development of Dark Souls 2 until about a ways length into the game's production when Tomohiro Shibuya was booted off the project after the higher up formed the opinion that the direction the game was taking was not desirable. This then led to Tanimura being handed the reins of sole director of the entire project, whilst also having to rewrite a lot of the elements of the game like the world and its narrative. Characters had to be completely redone, while pre-existing assets from earlier on in the game had to be reworked and integrated into the updated story. In this style, the production went on, giving birth to Dark Souls 2, how it was at launch. A lot of people just view this as, oh, Tanimura made Dark Souls 2 is bad, Tanimura sucks. But I think it's more like He saved Dark Souls 2 from being complete garbage and what would be an actual black sheep to the Souls series, and he turned it into a pretty great product overall, especially with this direction of the 3 DLC, the Crown of the Sunken King, the Crown of the Old Iron King, and the Crown of the Ivory King. 3 fantastic DLC that were complete upgrades content wise to what the base game had to offer, though they still had their issues. Whilst most people cheered when news came that Miyazaki would once again be leading the development for Dark Souls 3, there were those who were disappointed not to see it being Tanimura in that role. However, he was co-director for the game, whilst also leading production for the Ring City. That might explain the gankfest that DLC has to offer. And he also co-directed Elden Ring, which we all know how great and successful that game is now. So it's safe to say that this man is immensely talented and we'll probably see no shortage of him in the future. But all of this development did eventually lead to Dark Souls 2 being produced and released how it is today. Dark Souls 2 takes place in a distant era, possibly centuries or even millennia after the events of Dark Souls 1. In this time, the influence of the gods has waned and humanity has risen to prominence. Many kingdoms have flourished and crumbled since the days of the first game, and the flame has been kindled numerous times, marking the passage of ages. Several years prior to the beginning of Dark Souls 2, a man named Vendrick embarked on a quest to establish his own kingdom and link the fire. With possible assistance from his elder brother Aldia, Vendrick defeated the 4 Old Ones, entities believed to have inherited the Lord's souls following the events of Dark Souls 1, and founded the kingdom of Drangleic. Nashandra, a woman who approached Vendrick, warned him of the impending invasion by giants from the north. In response, Vendrick led his forces to confront the giants, though it's uncertain whether they truly posed a threat. He captured several giants and, with Aldia's aid, conducted experiments on them to unlock the secrets of souls. Vendrick wed Nashandra and constructed a grand castle, utilizing souls to animate inanimate objects like statues and armor, creating powerful golems. However, the giants retaliated, launching an invasion on Drangleic. Simultaneously, the undead curse resurfaced, plunging the kingdom into chaos. Vendrick, overwhelmed by the events unfolding, vanished, leaving the kingdom to descend into ruin. This is where we come into play. The player assumes the role of an undead traveller from a distant land who arrives in Drangleic seeking rumours of the soul's ability to lift the curse. However, upon arrival, they become embroiled in a complex struggle for power. Various factions vie for the player's allegiance, with some advocating for them to succeed Vendrick and link the fire, others seeking their aid in seizing the throne, and some even urging them to chart a third independent path. Caught in the midst of this intricate world-defining web, the player must navigate conflicting interests and forge their own destiny amidst the ruins of Drangleic. Now, I'm not one to splooge everywhere when it comes to the lore and stories of the Soulsborne series, and to be honest, out of all of them, Dark Souls 2 probably had me the least interested out of any of the games. I'm in no way saying it's bad or poorly written, only that it resonates with me the least, but there's still plenty that I do find intriguing and worth diving into. The manipulative, conniving trickster that is Nashandra, a shard of Manus who would go on to control Vendrick into attacking the giants, all to get a share of his power, and then further on would try and string together the actions of the player, us, to clear away all her obstacles so she could get easy access to the throne of one. The mighty King Vendrick, who is at the time we find him an empty shell of a person, condemned to eternal wandering in the shadows, dragging his sword with a feeble grip as his crown teeters precariously on his deteriorating head. His armour lies abandoned at the room's edge, a poignant symbol of the forgotten glory of a once majestic king reduced to mere remnants. The little connections between this game and its elder brother Dark Souls 1. At the beginning of the game, you're tasked with hunting down the 4 Old One, each of whom possesses one of the Lord Souls from Dark Souls 1. The Lost Sinner holds the Witch of Izalith's soul, the Old Iron King possesses Gwyn's, the Rotten harbours Nito's, and the Duke's dear Freya safeguards a fragment of Seath's soul. Not to mention Aldia, who's one of the best bosses we've ever gotten in the Dark Souls trilogy. Huh? Wait, what? Oh, whoa, I meant characters, not bosses. Certainly not bosses. The individual NPCs are also fantastic in this game and contribute heavily to my enjoyment of it personally, with their interesting and heartfelt storylines. Lucatiel of Mirror, a knight from the land of Mirror, who suffers from the undead curse. She is determined to retain her sense of self despite the curse, and her storyline revolves around her struggles to maintain her sanity and identity. As the player encounters Lucatiel throughout Drangleic, they learn more and more about her tragic past and her quest to find her brother. Creighton the Wanderer and mild-mannered Pate, two characters whose paths intersect with the player's journey multiple times throughout the journey. These are two more NPCs that I really love. Their storylines revolve around the rivalry and conflicting accounts of past events. Creighton accuses Pate of betrayal and seeks revenge, while Pate denies the accusations and claims innocence. As the player interacts with both characters and explores their respective quests, they are drawn into the mystery surrounding their feud, ultimately having to make choices that determine the outcome of their conflict. Ben Hart of Jugo, a jovial and adventurous warrior who claims to be on a quest to fulfill a prophecy. He accompanies the player on various adventures to Drangleic, sharing stories of his past exploits and offering assistance in battle. A questline that delves into the themes of heroism, destiny and the pursuit of glory as he seeks to prove himself as a legendary hero. Those are just a share of the colourful, or maybe not so colourful, characters that this game has to offer, each playing a part in expanding the atmosphere, vibe and elevating the world building of Drangleic. Alright, I think I've done enough speaking about the surrounding components of this game. Let's actually dive into some of the gameplay and exploration that Dark Souls 2 has to offer, of course beginning right at the start. Despite the Souls series being seemingly so against hand-holding the player to their experience, From Software are still kind and clever enough to implement a tutorial of some sort into their games. In Demon Souls we have the most straightforward and obvious case with the Outpost passage, feels like I'm the first person to ever refer to it as that culminates in an epic battle against the Vanguard demon. In Dark Souls we have the Northern Undead Asylum and everyone's favourite boss, the Asylum demon. It's possibly the best tutorial level of the bunch that teaches the player a myriad of things that will help them on their journey throughout. In Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, similar to the rest whilst also giving optional challenges to the player, concluding with a much tougher mandatory boss at the end in Udexgundir. In Sekiro we have the first iteration of the Ashina Reservoir, in which you'll get used to the game's stealth mechanics and can have an optional bout with the leader Shigenori Yamauchi before this happens. In Elden Ring we get a return to classic Demon Souls with the Cave of Knowledge, a completely optional yet highly detailed tutorial presenting the mechanics in depth with a menacing boss at the end. Here in Dark Souls 2 we get the things Betwixt, which has its own kinks for the player, the main one being the exclusion of a boss at the end. I feel a boss could have really benefited the tutorial of this game and would have helped with getting players used to the admittedly clunky controls on offer, as that one hippo didn't cut it for most of us unfortunately. Another part of every game that we also get is a fascinating cutscene that plays beforehand as well, in which lore, story and even sometimes bosses are presented to us to hype and keep us interested with the narrative to come. In Demon Souls, the brunt and character of the gameplay awaiting us is shown off as a final shot of the Dragon God leaves us fired up. In Dark Souls 1 and 3 we get the brief histories of Lordran and Lothric, as well as glimpses of upcoming boss encounters. In Bloodborne we have whatever the hell this is. In Sekiro we see the war of the closing Sengoku era, the characters of Ishin, Owl, Emma and even Wolf, how visceral and brutal the entire thing was and its effect on our protagonist. And in Elden Ring we have a similar cutscene to that of Dark Souls 1 and 3, except this time we're blessed with the narrator's over the top yet incredible voice acting, and of course the
Sir Gideon Othmere, the all-knowing.
Here in Dark Souls 2, we have this abstract cinematic, many elements representing themes of time and age and space, the process of hollowing, memory loss and the afterlife. There's a ton of personal feeling with this cutscene as opposed to its siblings' more straightforward and in-your-face storytelling. For me, honestly, it kind of just had me questioning what the hell this game was going to contain going forward, as it was a cutscene totally different to that of the other games and didn't do much in helping me figure out the narrative. I'm sure there are those who do enjoy that process of storytelling, but when it comes to the Souls series, I think the traditional method does a much better job when it comes to keeping the player interested and invested with the lore they are now. Also enjoyed how it basically kept telling me how much I'll be dying. Thanks lady, I already knew that coming into the game. Let's let the difficulty speak for itself, would you? Well, let's speak about what the things Betwixt has to offer. Not much at the start, it is an introduction and it does serve fairly well at that. It does have interesting side paths for later on in the game with the coffin that can change your gender and more hippos for some reason. These are guarded behind a fragrant branch of your statue, which is possibly one of the worst mechanics in this game. There's not too many of them and they guard actual vital parts of the game at times. I didn't like this feature one bit. There's also Dinah and Tilo, the crow trading NPCs who must have the most spammed through dialogue in the game because, with all due respect to the voice actors, I'm not trying to listen to that every time. With all that said and done, you do get a beautiful transition at the end, coming out the dreary, depressing woods and emerging to see an incredibly gorgeous and surreal view of the hub that is Majula. Majula is the iconic and serene refuge amidst the desolation of Drangleic and serves as the hub area for this game. Dark Souls 2 is an extremely divisive game, we all know that, but one thing everyone can agree on is that Majula is a fantastic central hub area. FromSoft has a catalogue of unreal hub areas for each of its games, but even amongst them, Majula is a standout and many people's favourite in the series, which goes to show how effective and impactful it really is. This coastal village plays a pivotal role, offering respite and a sense of home amidst the unforgiving and treacherous landscapes that await players on their journey. Nestled on a cliff overlooking the ocean, Majula greets players with a panoramic view of the sun-kissed horizon, its tranquil beauty contrasting sharply with the looming darkness that pervades the rest of Drangleic. The soundtrack that accompanies the area further is melancholic and beautifully accentuates its gentle atmosphere, evoking a sense of introspection and contemplation as you take a break from the horrors that await you when you'll eventually teleport out. Seriously, that music does wonders for the psyche, I'll tell you that. The presence of key NPCs here, offering guidance and companionship to players as they navigate the challenges that lie ahead, is crucial to the powerful atmosphere on offer. The Emerald Herald in particular plays a huge role in the game's progression, offering players the ability to level up their character and upgrade their Estus Flask, essential mechanics that shape the player's journey throughout the game. Moreover, Majula serves as a nexus of interconnected pathways that lead to various regions and landmarks scattered throughout Drangleic. The presence of branching paths is amazing and akin to Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls 1. From Majula, you can go and access quite a few different areas such as the Forest of the Fallen Giants, Heide's Tower of Flame, the Pit and the Grave of Saints, and even the Shaded Woods once you get a fragrant branch of yore. No one really talks about the fact that Majula links to quite a lot of stuff. Beyond its practical functions, Majula serves as a sanctuary for players, providing essential resources to aid them on their quest going forward. It's a symbol of hope and resilience in the face of adversity. Despite the encroaching darkness and the looming threat of the undead curse, Majula remains as a bastion of hope, a beacon of light amidst the shadows that engulf Drangleic. The presence of other travellers and adventurers who congregate in Majula further reinforces this sense of solidarity and camaraderie. As players exchange stories, strategies and items, forging connections in the face of mutual adversity is what makes Majula so powerful. So like a lot of the other Souls games, you've got a base objective that you'll be working towards in order to make progression through the game. Like in Demon Souls, you gotta beat all the 5 archdemons. In Dark Souls 1, you'll be later tasked to obtain the 4 Lord Souls. And in Dark Souls 3, you're tasked to return the 4 remaining Lords of Cinders to their thrones. Similarly enough, here in Dark Souls 2, our base objective is to be able to pass through the Shine of Winter so we can get to Drangleic Castle and eventually find King Vendrick. And how do we get through the Shine of Winter? Well, by defeating the 4 Old Ones who possess great souls. They're each tucked away in their own portion of the world. But there actually is a different way to get to the Shrine of Winter, and that's by farming. Yes, farming. If you have raked up a total of 1 million souls, be it from regular enemies, bosses, soul items, whatever, you'll get a free pass to the Shrine of Winter. Well, some of you might be wondering, how the hell am I supposed to farm 1 million souls on a new game character? I'd much rather just progress through normally and beat the 4 old ones. And that's where the inclusion of this new item called Bonfire Aesthetics come into play. You see, as much as it does get shitted on for its bizarre and baffling insertions of mechanics, some we'll get into later, it did add its fair share of geniusness as well. Dark Souls 2, hats off to you for this. Bonfire Aesthetics allow you to reset a once cleared area back to its original state, respawning all of the items, enemies, as well as the boss encounter itself. The only caveat being, well, if you even think this is a negative thing, every enemy and boss you respawn will be now scaled to the next new game cycle. So if you used it on a new game area, then that area's difficulty becomes scaled to new game plus. Used it on a new game plus area, then goes to new game plus 1. You get the gist. Generally though, it's a perfect way to keep fighting a boss to give you more souls to get to that 1 million count. Although it's the type of mechanic you're probably not going to do in your first ever run of the game, it's still very useful for things like challenge runs or speed runs, and provides a lot of flexibility when doing replays of the game. I wish they brought this back in the rest of the series. Just being able to revisit a boss is just a win in itself, man. So for that, I'll applaud you, Dark Souls 2. Great job. The first area that players are likely to step foot in after Majula would be the Forest of the Fallen Giants. A pretty large starting area, but that's nothing unusual from FromSoft and their gateway levels, right? Well, even so, amongst its peers, I still feel like the Forest of the Fallen Giants was unusually long, By the end of my time with the area, it felt like I spent hours on end trying to reach the goal, and I thought to myself, well, why the hell have I wasted half a day's time stuck in the bloody first area of the game? And that's when I realised it wasn't really because of the level itself. It wasn't unnaturally big. It was because I kept getting bent over and fucked by how difficult the area was. Now, the first thing I'd normally do when I suck at something is what? Yeah, of course, try and get better and deal with it. No, it's fucking not. I look for something else to blame like a normal human. Why are we stuck with a single Estus flask for a majority of the levels run? It gets bumped up to 2 at the end, but wow, it seems really unfair, especially with the forced health loss mechanic from the more hollow you become. As if me turning into this monstrosity wasn't punishment enough. I don't even want to mention adaptability at this point, as it's been harped on so bloody much, but it's turned into a Dark Souls 2 topical tradition at this point, so here we go. If you're not too aware of the significance of the ADP stat, then essentially it directly affects the player's agility stat, which determines the speed and effectiveness of actions such as rolling, backstepping and item usage. It influences the number of iframes, essentially determining the player's ability to evade attacks effectively. A higher agility stat results in more iframes, meaning the player has a larger window of invulnerability during dodges, making them more agile and capable of avoiding enemies' attacks with greater precision. Previously in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1, the ability to roll and the mechanics of iframes weren't tied to a stat at all, and the only way to influence your player's agility, let's say, was by removing your armor or something similar to make yourself lighter. There's no need to waste points into another stat, as it's not a thing. I don't know what the rationale was behind implementing ADP into this game, but man was that an awful decision to do. The only positive I can think with this, which is not even really tied to ADP itself, is that it's really easy to level up in this game, so investing in ADP early on isn't an impossible task. Okay, back to the actual level now. So I wouldn't say it's a bad level by any means, but on the opposite hand, I wouldn't say it's a standout in any way either. It does have its fair share of great encounters. That early pursuer one in particular terrified me, and it has some late game moments that sure make it memorable. Though I can't say I'm too fond of any of the enemies in this area. The ironclad soldiers in particular are especially annoying, and oh, who can forget the giant gank fest towards the start of the level. Holy shit, what were they thinking? Another change from the original that baffles my mind. The two boss encounters of this area are pretty polarizing in experience. The last giant isn't anything too offensive, but it's really just a glimpse of a lot of fights to come. Slow and boring. Him ripping his arms off and using them as weapons were a fine touch though, and I'll always enjoy that in boss battles. It's also a cool realization when you figure out that he's the giant lord later on in the game. Now when I say the last giant was slow and boring, the pursuer's fight was literally the opposite. Very quick and exhilarating. The run back to him can be quite a pain in the ass, but let's be realistic, nothing like what comes up in the future. His introductory cutscene is a cinematic statement, and his fight isn't anything to scoff at either. It's extremely tension filled with your limited heals and possibly limited health, and the flow of battle is fantastic at this point as well. His moveset can be predictable and basic, but I still think it offers for a thrilling duel that elevates the early experience of the game quite a lot. Either interact with this random crow's nest to be taken away to the Lost Bastille, which is a level that at this point in time I'd personally put in more preparation for, or you can go down to one of the alternate routes from Majula and stumble across Heide's Tower of Flame. Oh, there's also the path to go to the Shaded Woods if you do end up buying a fragrant branch of yore from the merchant Melentia back in the Forest of the Fallen Giants, but that's an even worse choice than going to the Lost Bastille if I'm being honest. Well, the path I'd usually take at this point is to traverse to Heide's Tower of Flame, and can I say wow, this area is absolutely breathtaking. Seriously, it has to be one of the Souls series' most beautiful locales. The stunning architecture, serene ambience and breathtaking vistas overlooking the sea creates a sense of grandeur and majesty that captivated me from the moment I arrived. It's a much shorter area than the Forest of the Fallen Giants, but it is a lot tougher as well, I will say that. For one, the enemies are a step up from the previous area. The place is populated with various old knights and multiple sleeping Heide knights. The old knights are pretty fun to fight and can be a great means to practice the game's clunky combat on. The Heide knights on the other hand are weird because half of them are asleep on your initial exploration of the level, but the few on your way to the old dragon slayer are not and can make your life a living hell, as they're paired with an old knight when you're trying to fight them. This is another change made from the original to Scholar, as I'm aware the Heide knights were placed sparingly across the game and were more of an optional challenge for the player to attempt, kind of similar to the Black Knights in Dark Souls 1 in a way. But in Scholar they're littered around Heide's Tower of Flame, which I guess makes sense in one way as it is Heide's tower, so having Heide knights shouldn't be anything out of the ordinary, right? Well, they're aggravatingly difficult to take care of so early on. They're also janky as hell too, with moves that come out at an unnatural pace and are just generally a pain to deal with. Well, ultimately I can just run past them to get to the boss, right? Shouldn't be that big of a deal. The thing is that another stupid addition to Scholar was made with this area. They decided to add a freaking dragon right before the bridge to the old Dragon Slayer that you have to kill in order to lower the bridge to get across. What the hell were they thinking, adding both the inflated number of Heide Knights and the mandatory dragon to kill? It's such a mind-boggling decision that hurts the level a lot. It's the combination of both of these things that make it so awful for me, as it's extremely tough to deal with the dragon with all the Heide Knights up your ass. This brings me to another new feature that Dark Souls 2 added, which never returned, and that's the despawning enemies mechanic. You see, after you kill the same enemy a certain number of times, they stop spawning entirely and can only be brought back by either joining the company of champions, using a bonfire aesthetic, or just starting a new game plus cycle. I can see why they never brought this mechanic back, but if there was ever a game that needed it, it is certainly this one. Because thank the heavens that you can despawn enemies. Some runbacks to the bosses were in desperate need for this. I bring this up because on my first playthrough, in Heide's Tower of Flame, I ended up killing some of the enemies so many times on my way to that damn dragon that they ended up despawning, and it had me wildly confused the first time around. For some time I actually thought that my game was bugged and I had to search up and question this exact thing, only to gladly realise that it was an intended part of the game, which was an actual awesome addition and helped with so many parts of the game that I found unnecessarily frustrating. The Ring of Binding can also be found within this level, which is a very helpful ring to combat the hollowing mechanic, similar to the Cling Ring in Demon Souls. But if I'm being honest, I'd rather the hollowing health loss just not be a thing, and so I could retain one of my precious ring slots, which thankfully though there is 4 of, compared to Dark Souls 1's only 2. There actually being 4 ring slots is quite nice, as it allows for a lot more different approaches when it comes to tackling certain areas that you may be struggling with. Just like in the Forest of the Fallen Giants, Heide's Tower of Flame offers 2 bosses, but only one of them this time is mandatory to progress onwards through the area. I will talk about the old Dragon Slayer first, however, as being the kill all bosses type of player that I am, I always go for the old Dragon Slayer first, so I don't have to deal with every damn Heide Knight in existence, but even then it's a struggle to unlock. The old Dragon Slayer is of course just a reskinned Ornstein from Dark Souls 1. It's without a doubt lazy as fuck. But honestly I don't mind this as much as others do, because Ornstein is cool as hell and his moveset this time is pretty fun to fight against. Plus the arena looks pretty dope. I like fighting him one on one, it's a nice breath of fresh air compared to the overly intense fight in Dark Souls 1 versus Ornstein and Smoke. I just don't think I'll be going after this boss at an early level next time I play this game, because I think I've gotten some type of PTSD from the hell that happens beforehand with that damn dragon. Well, the other fight that you must complete if you want to progress onwards is the Dragon Rider, probably one of the most reused bosses throughout the game. If you've noticed, throughout the level there's been levers placed in various locations that can be pulled, which increases the amount of room in the arena that you'll eventually be fighting in. Honestly, it doesn't even matter all that much anyway, as it's so easy and it's such a joke that a lot of players just leave the arena to its original size so they can actually get him to fall off for a 10-second battle. It's a very nice tactic for speedrunners. The rematches later on in this game are a lot tougher than his actual boss battle, which is pretty hilarious. But for the level overall, I really do love the aesthetic and atmospheric nature that is brought, but I do have to deduct some points from it because of the unnecessary additions that came with Scholar. This really is a level that I'd like to experience in its original form, as I feel like Scholar did it dirty in some ways. Let me know in the comments how different is Heide's Tower of Flame in the original compared to Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. Earlier I mentioned how you could get to the Lost Bastille after defeating the Pursuer in the Forest of the Fallen Giants. Well, there is another way to get there in fact, and that's by completing the area that comes shortly after Heide's Tower of Flame, and that being No Man's Wharf. This is a very interesting level and I'm actually really pulled into the ideas and presentation it goes for. We've had our fair share of dark-ish levels before, some have worked more than others, but that discussion is for another time. In my opinion, No Man's Wharf is a level that actually gains some positive character and individuality from the darkness mechanic, and it works well because it's not complete darkness. Believe it or not, you can see what's going on when you're in combat outside, which is always appreciated. Another part of the level's identity is the torch mechanic, in which you can go around with your torch and use it to light up certain parts of the level. The torch feature can be hit or miss for some players, but it does play a nice role in this area. It makes me think that torches maybe were meant to play a bigger role in the game as a whole. The enemy encounters are reasonably fair, but they can sometimes be overwhelming and a bit ganky, but that's just the whole game to be honest. The Dark Dwellers though, what an enemy. Just look at these goofy bastards. They're straight out of Scooby-Doo, but they do definitely add to the uncanny and eerie atmosphere that's on offer. This level's design is just really solid, to be honest. It has a great layout in which you circle around the area to get to the switch so you can call the ship and fight the boss. The shortcut of this level is fantastic and it gives it a nice loop around that was much needed, as let's be real, running around the entire level every time you died to the boss would be a bloody nightmare. Once you've cleared the level, all that's left to do is to board the ship and take on the boss of this area, the Flexile Century. Just like the level, the Flexile Century has its own interesting quirks for the fight. For one, the arena you're in is slowly filling up with water over time. That starts hindering your movement, making dodges much tougher to pull off. Another thing is that the boss itself in appearance is two conjoined bodies stuck together, two souls working together to try and stop us from advancing. Each body uses a different weapon, one dual wielding swords whilst the other dual wields clubs. Only one attacks at a time however, and it's usually the one in front of you. I say usually as it's quite easy to exploit by getting the AI to attack at a time where you'll be guaranteed to be safe. As a whole, this boss is pretty solid. It has a fun moveset and the elevated tension with the water makes it for a fun time. I hope you enjoyed it because you'll be fighting it again soon. No Man's Wharf in its entirety is very cool, an underrated area that I have a soft spot for. Like come on, it's a freaking pirate themed Souls area for God's sake. Great stuff, let's move on. After you defeat the Flexile Century, you get automatically sent to the Lost Bastille via the ship you're on. So that's the area we'll cover next. I'm just going to throw Sinner's Rise into this discussion as well. Anyone got a problem with that? Good. So the Lost Bastille is another one of Dark Souls 2's areas where I find it appropriate to describe it as decent with nothing to stand out on any side of the spectrum. No, not that spectrum. It's home to our special blacksmith Macduff, and we have another terrifying pursuer encounter. Speaking about Macduff, can I say I love how this game encourages players to have fun with different types of weapons. If you explore well enough, then you should have enough Titanite resources to upgrade a variety of weapons to a respectable amount to test on. The fact that there's so many bosses is a questionable part of the game, but at least we gain a ton more boss weapons to tinker about with. That was just a small point that I wanted to throw in there. Another part of the Lost Bastille is that wall that hides a bonfire behind it that I always struggle an unreasonable amount with when it comes to trying to get that barrel to blast it open. Another case of the fragrant branch of yours shows up, and it's by blocking this door, which I would highly suggest using one of them on. But be cautious when you open it because a bloody clown fest of swordsmen will come running out at you, and before you know it you're swarmed and dead. After going through a decent amount of the level, we get to our first hurdle, the Ruined Sentinels. Man, did these guys ruin me on my first playthrough. Strangely enough however, I never found myself too pissed at the ordeal, as I kinda enjoyed this fight despite it being 1 vs 3. It got me to develop a strategy for once, instead of just attack, as they're spread out at the start and you're basically in a 1v1 on the small platform before the second guy jumps up. I enjoyed the thrill of trying to balance them and deal enough damage before the second one showed up. Usually though, it ends up as a messy 1v2 towards the end of the bottom floor, but the fight doesn't do a terrible job when it comes to breaking my mental fortitude like some of the other ganks in this game. The next boss however is against one of the 4 old ones that are last, but before we get to them we have to go through Sinner's Rise, and I think this is where the first case of boss reusage comes into play, as we get to have a rematch with the Flexile Century. Oh boy, this one hurts too because we literally just went up against it in the previous damn level. It's best to lure it back towards the elevator too, as the water it comes from can hinder your movement, much like the one on the actual pirate ship, and it'll make the battle terribly sluggish, but ultimately it is just another normal enemy now, as even if you do kill it, it'll respawn the next time you come down here, just like every other enemy, and that's a damn shame because I really did like the design of this boss. It was really solid, but seeing it again not even much longer after we initially battled it really hurts my perception of it as a whole. Another note of mention are these rupturing hollows. They're quite terrifying throughout the level with their COD zombie style dolphin dives that really fuck you up. But in the horrible water it becomes even more dangerous, so you'll always need to be aware of them. We now come to our first old one of the game, the Lost Sinner, who's one of the more interesting and cooler bosses we've fought so far. She's a demented prisoner and has clear ties to the Witch of Izalith from Dark Souls 1, as we see that damned bug crawling from out of her. It's a battle that can be approached in 2 different ways. One is by lighting the surrounding arena from the outside to make the fight more manageable and fairer for the player. This way ensures that your lock-on has a wider reach and can stick with the boss from a further distance. The other way is is just by saying screw it and just entering the battle on her terms, which is the way I go for. For some reason, I do enjoy the darkness. The chaos and frenzy that it instills in you is such a thrill to experience and makes the fight more of a challenge, which I appreciate. Once you defeat the Lost Sinner, you get your hefty weight in souls and can venture on to light your first primal bonfire. A bonfire you'll always need to light when defeating any old one. This signifies the end of that portion of the game and means you can move on to another whilst it teleports you back to Majula, where you can have your brief respite and safety before you venture out onto another area. The next area on our journey is another that can be accessed from Majula, provided if the player has already spoken to Lissia of Lindell at the end of Heide's Tower of Flame. She'll be waiting for us back on the original path that leads to Heide's Tower of Flame and has a unique function where she can move the path of that room so that the resulting exit will lead us to a different area. Earlier we took the way and were led through a long path with a lot of light shining the way as we eventually stumbled upon the majestic view of Heide's Tower of Flame. This time, however, as we take the exit, our path is just clad with an overwhelming darkness as we walk across narrow ledges to finally leave and be greeted by the miserable and depressing Huntsman's Copse. I say that because it was the first and most appropriate words that sprung to mind when I thought about this section. The enemy encounters, especially in this area, are just not fun whatsoever, as you'll be ganged up and surprised by numerous times in situations that feel vastly punishing when it happens. Something I do love about this level is the bonfire that requires a key to access. It's one of the moments in the game where genuine tension begins to overwhelm me, as it's at a time where I'm low on heals and I desperately need a resting place. I can see the damn thing, but I just can't get to it. It's literally the phrase "so close yet so far" personified, and it's just such a cool way to raise the stakes. There's also this jump, which is incredibly hard and painful to execute until I realized you could just get to it by dropping off the bridge that precedes the Executioner's Chariot. Speaking of which, I think it's time I talk about the first of many of Dark Souls 2's nasty runbacks. Up to now, the runbacks have been pretty like whatever, you know, take it or leave it. You're used to them if you play the other games, but with the Executioner's Chariot, you get your first glimpse of the torture that'll follow from this. The first and main issue, which is one that's universally shared with every boss run in this game, is the lack of iframes for the animation of going through the fog wall. In Dark Souls 2, you can now be staggered and damaged out of your animations, and I feel it severely goes under the radar about how stupid of a design choice this is. Not only do you have to worry about legging it through the level whilst avoiding all manner of enemies that are thrown at you, you also have to basically pray that the enemies don't catch up to you in time and beat the shit out of you before going through the fog. In this case, there's a chance, albeit a very low one. There's still some slither of a chance that you can get through unscathed, but later on there's a different run back where it's genuinely impossible to get through the fog without killing some of the enemies. The other issue with the run back is the enemies. Like, what's with these unrelenting executioners? They're as persistent as those damn skeletons from Demon Souls. Also, this phantom in front of the fog is just top tier levels of unnecessary. I mean, the enemies wouldn't be nowhere near as big of a problem if we just had complete iframes during the fog animation. What makes it worse is that the Executioner's Chariot is a boss where I usually take a few deaths to, and it's not even from the damn boss, it's from the skeletons ganking the shit out of me. I like this whole idea of the boss fight, a chariot riding boss whom we have to knock over and then duke it out with the horse. It makes it sound circling the arena until you get to the lever to knock the bastard over. The problem comes from this first phase. It gets tedious as hell when you're having to repeat it over and over again, especially combined with the infuriating skeletons and their mages you have to kill. The second phase against the horse itself isn't too bad, if I'm being honest. The moveset of the horse is pretty fun to deal with, and the kill feels very satisfying after the torturous events that led up to it. Hey, without this horse battle, we may not have been given the next legendary horse battles to come in the series. That was the optional boss, however. The main boss of this area is the Skeleton Lords, and this boss gets a lot of flack. To be fair, there's not much to say about them, but I am one of those that tend to enjoy the horde / mob style bosses in these games. Sure, they're not anything great, but definitely not as bad as some people make them out to be. The arena is really cool and functions well within the parameters of the fight. It does a good job of enabling the player to crowd control. It's another fight which you can approach in two ways. Would you rather have a more controlled and thought through battle, or just chaos incarnate? Either way, it's a pretty decent fight that clears the way forward and lets us finally leave this crappy area. Although I did say we're leaving a crappy area, the combination of levels next isn't much better. Really though, I'm just glad we finally get a palette switch from the boring and dreary colours we've had for a string of levels. Dark Souls 2 in particular has quite a few areas that implement poison into its gameplay, but the most infamous of them has to be the Harvest Valley. Like straight from the bat, you know the developers were laughing their asses off when they placed this pool of poison right outside of the first bonfire. Great troll from Soft, great troll. Harvest Valley doesn't have too much to do within it, but one interesting thing it does do is the way that being poisoned functions here. Usually we're used to the swamps, the lakes, the fields of muddy greenery that will quickly sap away at your health bar whilst also slowing down your movement quite dramatically. However, in Harvest Valley, it's more like a thick air of toxicity that poisons the player as they progress through, which I low-key like more as it doesn't slow down your character in some obnoxious fashion. It's like deciding between which is the lesser evil. It's also home to the heirs of the Sun Covenant, and I just love the presentation of it. Despite being in this hazardous, toxic atmosphere, the light it shines manages to wow me into becoming a follower. Well, like I said, there's not much else to this area as it just moves straight onto the next area with no connecting boss fight. Earthen Peak is another area where poison plays a huge role, but yet again it's not in the traditional sense. Here there's a lot of traps and caution that the player must undertake, as one misstep may lead you into being drenched in that gooey green substance that rots away at you. Although I said Harvest Valley didn't have a boss fight, well, not too long into Earthen Peak comes one of the bosses of all time. The Covetous Demon is one of a few fights who just doesn't need to be there. It doesn't even need to be placed as a boss at all. Some bosses just get placed behind a fog wall with a giant health bar just for the hell of it. I say this, but I just can't come to hate the damn thing. Look at it, you just want to give it a hug. The layout of this level is quite impressive. There's a variety of ways to progress and a lot on offer to do. The enemies will not let you have your way though, as they are really tricky. The mannequins are very frustrating to deal with and usually come in pairs and have stun locked you into death before you even know what happened. The desert sorcerers are also extremely deadly enemies who can destroy your health bar in sometimes one attack. Another point of note is that this area also houses Laddersmith Gilligan, a pretty important NPC that helps you on your way to the Rotten, but more on that later. The last thing I'll mention is probably something you all knew I'd have something to say about, and that's of course the Hammersmiths. Them damn bastards always trying to spill their poison on me. No, obviously it's the windmill. For the upcoming boss, it's in your best interest to burn this windmill with your torch. But why? Why should I do that? Well, because the boss of this area, Mitha, the Baneful Queen, has poison all over her arena, which can also heal her. Burning the windmill, however, prevents that from becoming an issue. The problem with this is that it's conveyed so poorly to the player. Like, who in the right mind is thinking, 1 second, yeah, let me burn this windmill down, it's looking at me funny. Like, no way people didn't either know about it beforehand or searched up like I did. That wasn't exactly a unique take, but one I had to get out there because I actually find this boss quite enjoyable. Mitha, the Baneful Queen, is an interesting fight that can be admittedly easy, but harbours an enjoyable moveset to play around with. She can uniquely use her head as a weapon of its own to attack the player. It's pretty hilarious. A lot of these Dark Souls 2 bosses don't offer anything too exciting, which is one of the big problems I have with these bosses when you have a roster of 42 of them. Most of them are just decent or mildly fun at best, and it has a stupid amount of stinkers as well. Well, once you slay the decapitated Lamia, you ride on out of this giant windmill and get to the top where we arrive at a lava fortress? The final area for the second Old One Soul, in my playthrough at least, and it's just always hilarious to see the transition in areas, especially when you remember looking at the windmill from above. Like really, this was hiding at the very top. Fair play, mate. Sometimes it genuinely feels like the team didn't even consider how some of these extremely polarizing areas in design would connect to one another. The question gets brought up in the planning process and the conversation just goes, elevator? Sounds good. The Iron Keep is a pretty notorious level in Dark Souls 2. For one, it looks so freaking awesome. The aesthetic design of this formidable fortress plays some heavy lifting into my enjoyment of the area. The Alon Knights as well are very cool individually. Notice how I said individually, because the Iron Keep has one glaring problem with it. There's so goddamn many of them. This is yet another one of the changes from the original they made that left everybody confused. Why do this? They must have been having a damn clown party or something. They invited fucking everybody now. And I hope you're not thinking about trying to run past them. Don't you dare, because it's not even possible. Seriously. I'm not even one that skips enemies. I usually do take my time picking them off and clearing the level out before taking on the boss. But then I go in and die like a scrub and all the enemies have respawned. Great. Well, that's fine. I'll just run past them and get straight back to the boss. Yeah, that ain't happening. You know how I said with the Executioner's Chariot, how there's a small chance of getting back to the boss fog unscathed? Well, with the Iron Keep's first boss, that's not possible. You need to kill at least some of the enemies to pass through. And once you stop to entertain one of them, they're all on your ass, thanks to the ridiculous leash distance they have, being able to smell you from a mile away. I ended up having some of them despawn, which is just a memory that'll haunt me forever. I fucking hate this run back with a passion. It's such a shame too because the boss for it, the Smelter Demon, is actually one of my favourites from the base game. He's got such a badass design and real tense moveset to deal with. In my opinion, he's the hardest boss up until this point. It's a treat and the fight is always a joy. It's so good that they reskin it for one of the DLC, which is something I'll speak on down the line. I hate how there's always some part of me that wants to skip it due to the horrendous runback. You do need that bonfire that it gives access to, however, because starting all the way back at the beginning sounds like genuine hell. Something to note is that there's another fun pursuer interaction if you revisit the Smelter Demon's arena. It's always nice to keep running into them, testing how good you've become by seeing how easily you can dismantle it compared to the last time they'd have appeared. The rest of the area is honestly not so bad and feels a lot more fairer when it comes to enemy placement. I love these platform mechanics. It's nice to see how you can play traps on the enemy for once. They did bring back the ironclad soldiers though, and they make this tight corridor section chaotic as fuck. Their slams slow you down and almost turn you into a vegetable, but with enough patience, they're not that bad. It's pretty nuts how contrasting my experience with the first half of the level is compared to the second half. But with all that said and done, the second old one is waiting for us, and it's the old Iron King. What a creative name. Now the Lost Sinner was a pretty enthralling fight, but here with the old Iron King is kind of an absolute pushover. Surely you could sense something is wrong with the actual difficulty of the boss fight comes from a random hole in the arena instead of the actual boss itself. This had to be another troll, like what is the need for that hole? It's so unnecessary. Even if it's generic as they come, I still really dig the design. You cannot tell me it doesn't look epic. Just all in all though, it's a very middle of the road boss fight and pretty underwhelming for one of the old ones. Leaving this area has me extremely confused as to how I feel about it. How highly can I even rate it despite all the trauma the first portion gave me? Is it still bad that I like it more than the majority of the levels so far? Ah well, let's bloody move on. To be honest, I completely forgot about these mini areas, so I'm here to talk about it now, although there's not much to say really. These areas are mainly to get you familiar with the Bellkeeper's Covenant and are cool for PvP/invasion purposes. Online play isn't really something I delve into too much, but from what I've heard, the PvP in Dark Souls 2 was really fun and a standout part about the game, which is nice, and I'm glad those who indulged in it enjoyed it so much. I'm sure those of you, myself included here, who went out of their way to collect the platinum trophy for this game spent quite a lot of time in Belfry Sol, farming that one mad warrior phantom enough times so you could obtain the hidden weapon sorcery. These sub areas aren't really anything of note. They just exist in my eyes. What is something of note is the boss of Belfry Luna, the Belfry Gargoyles. Man, what a joke of a boss. Dark Souls 2 has some questionable reskins or homages or whatever word you'd like to use of Dark Souls 1, but this one has to be the worst of them. The Bell Gargoyles, who were already a take on the man-eaters from Demon Souls, were a fantastic fight from the first game and taught a lot to the player in a fair and reasonable manner. This boss just feels like nothing more than a boss rush added in to push the number of fights up. I always forget about the Belfry areas, so by the time I do end up stopping by them, I'm strong enough to a point where I have minimal trouble dealing with the gargoyles, but man do I feel for those who took them on early in their playthroughs. Facing potentially up to 6 of them sounds like a fucking miserable time. It's just another waste of a boss battle. With the Lost Sinner and the old Iron King being crossed off the list, next up is to take on the Rotten, which probably has the quickest and shortest route to get to, hence why it's so often used for speedruns. If you didn't notice the giant gaping pit in the middle of Majula, then well done, you're an absolute blind idiot. This is technically accessible from the start of the game, but requires you to do some traditional Souls platforming, albeit not as bad as in the other games. What can help you is the cat NPC, who conveniently enough sells you the silver cat ring so close to the pit, allowing you to take reduced damage from dropping off of heights, which is great because it means you can drop down the pit a lot more easily. However, there is another way to get down. Remember Laddersmith Gilligan? Well, if you spoke with him enough times at the Earthern Peak, he travels back to Majula and you can pay him to build ladders for you to get down with. I do enjoy the added complexity of NPCs in Dark Souls 2. They do a fine job of making the world feel more intricate and connecting themselves with you in your journey. As you traverse your way down the pit, however, you'll find various loots and whatnot, but part way down you might notice a hole in the wall that leads you to somewhere, and that somewhere being the Grave of Saints. It's another one of those Covenant PvP areas, so once again it's a pretty damn quick and short level, which also means once again I won't have much to say about it, but this does serve as a good time to talk about one of Dark Souls 2's unique features, Pharos Lockstones. The primary function of Pharos Lockstones is to activate hidden mechanisms and contraptions scattered throughout various various locations in the game. These mechanisms are typically concealed behind illusory walls or hidden passages and can only be accessed by using a Pharos lockstone. They're kind of similar to the fragrant branches of Yore, but this time they don't guard vital areas of progression, so they're not as offensive. I could say that these items are pretty forgettable part of the game, nothing special but nothing too insulting either. Well, with that out of the way, let's speak on the boss of the area, the Royal at Vanguard. It's another swarming mob style boss similar to the Skeleton Lords, except this time I actually won't defend it. It's a very silly boss. Essentially there's just a bunch of rats and you need to kill enough of them so the main rat jumps down into the room for you to kill. You can spot it apart from the crowd thanks to its mohawk, which is fucking hilarious actually, what the hell. It's a ridiculously easy boss and another one that doesn't deserve boss status, but Dark Souls 2 sure enjoyed giving it out to random ads for no good reason. The main path to our next old one consists of mainly 3 areas. The pit, which is more of a transitional area, the Black Gulch, which lies right before the boss, and the gutter, which is what we're moving on to now. The gutter is an infamous level in Dark Souls 2, known mostly for its oppressive darkness as it's a large focal point of the area. Being able to navigate through the near total darkness whilst also having to fend off dangerous enemies and be cautious for mischievous traps. Except you don't have to do that. What I described was how I went through the level on my first playthrough, and it's safe to say I didn't have much fun doing so, as its treacherous terrain reminded me of upper portions of Blighttown, whilst the restricted visibility gave me flashbacks to the Tomb of the Giants. You see, you can play through the gutter by choosing to go all balls out in the darkness, but the more reasonable and safer option would be to make use of the torchlight that's been with us through the whole game. Just like with No Man's Wharf, the gutter is another area that makes excellent use of the torch mechanic and what it has to offer. Around the level, there happens to be these sconces that you can use to illuminate the path ahead. They can also function as markers in some way to let you know whether you've been to a specific part of the level or not. Pretty ingenious if you ask me. Another part of the gutter that I do enjoy is its sense of verticality. The area is filled with towering structures and dizzying drops, forcing players to carefully navigate their way up and down the precarious platforms and ladders. This verticality adds an extra layer of complexity to exploration, requiring players to constantly be on the lookout for hidden pathways and shortcuts that can provide a safe passage through the darkness. Verticality is always a feature that I enjoy in the FromSoft levels. It feels super creative when done well, and yeah, I'm a big fan of them. What I'm not a big fan of are these pots that absolutely annihilate your durability if you roll through them. Another moment where you just know the staff were pissing themselves when they placed it there. What's interesting is that for once there isn't a boss at the end of the level. I was sure that the team would have jumped at the opportunity to place another boss, like a duo covetous demon boss fight with a bunch of poison spitting statues around the arena. Speaking of which, those poison spitting statues are pretty awful. They stagger you most of the time, and the poison in this game takes a lot of your health away very quickly. It's not so bad in the gutter, but it is abysmal in the next area, the Black Gulch. Now right off the bat, this area sucks. There's no skirting around the obvious, but let me say this, it kind of looks awesome. The green and black colour palette seems strangely cool, and I can't say that I hate that part of the level. Surely I'm not alone in this opinion. Otherwise, yeah, it does suck. The absolute spammage of poisonous statues is laughable. They'll hit you from every direction unless you want to go out of your way to break them all. It doesn't help either that the enemies of this area turn the experience into a chaotic mess with the way they just start popping up from the grounds on the walls. There's also a trio of red phantom NPCs that can spawn, making the level even more obnoxious. One saving grace is the bonfire that is so close to the boss fog, but even then it's guarded by a fragrant branch of Yore, so if you're out of those at the moment then tough luck. It's such a laughably garbage area on all fronts, but thankfully it's a short one before you tackle the boss. So moving on to the next old one, we have the Rotten, quite an intimidating five with the fire placed around the arena and its grotesque yet intriguing design. It looks like something the One Reborn would have turned into if you woke up on the right side of the bed. The moveset of the Rotten is fun to go up against, and I love that you can actually take out his arms, preventing him from using probably the most dangerous attack in his arsenal. I'm glad there's no annoying gimmick and it's just a straight brawl. With how some of the fights in this game are, it could have been a lot worse, but thankfully it wasn't, and serves as a great third old one to fight on our journey. Now with the Lost Sinner, the Old Iron King and the Rotten down for the count, that means we only have one old one left, and that's the Duke's Dear Freya, who lies beyond our fourth path that will be taken from Majula. I hope you've got some fragrant branches of Yore left on hand, because we'll be using a couple as we travel through the upcoming zone. If we make our way past Benheart of Jugo, we'll find the main statue that we'll need to use a fragrant branch of Yore on. Turns out it's an NPC named Rosabeth, and you're able to donate to her your shittiest pieces of clothing for her to dress up in. What a nice person we are. Progressing onwards takes us to the Shaded Woods, the area that houses the Shrine of Winter, but that's not our destination just yet. This area is probably most notable for those pesky roaming souls that are infamous for being unable to lock onto, as well as them always managing to sneak up behind you, just general nuisances. But I think what's more strange than them has to be these forest goblins. This has to be one of the most bizarre designs FromSoft has come up with, and that's in a series with a lot of strange and peculiar creatures. Moving on from that though, this area has a lot of statues that you can use your fragrant branches on, but frankly some of these statues are placed in absolutely ridiculous positions. This lion one in particular drops a key needed to access on effects, but why would I think about even using it on this one in particular if I didn't know? Its position is just so seemingly random with no thought put into it whatsoever. Before I get into the boss fight though, there is a very interesting NPC you can interact with, and that's Man Scorpion Talk. I say interact because he doesn't actually communicate in common tongue naturally, and you need the Ring of Whispers to understand what he's saying, but it's then when you learn about the interesting dynamics of this area and between him and the upcoming boss. But damn, I need to say this, the NPCs in this game talk a lot. Of course this is a nitpick, but I can't be alone here surely. Sometimes it feels like you're just chatting away till the sun sets. It's insane. Anyways, let's move on to the area's boss. Chaos Witch Quail, Scorpioness Nashka. Let's be real, it's hard to not see the similarities between the two. Her fight is just another middle of the road Dark Souls 2 boss with some mage elements added in. I will say though, this attack where she burrows underneath the ground is pretty damn neat. Overall though, decent boss that caps this visually bland and uninteresting area. The next stop on our journey is the Doors of Pharos, and this area serves similarly to the Grave of Saints as another transitional level. Well, this time it's a lot more of a level than the Grave of Saints is. Like a few other areas we've gone through, the Doors of Pharos seemingly has a lot of gameplay mechanics that benefit PvP similar to the Grave of Saints, with both sharing an excessive amount of Pharos lockstone contraptions on offer. Really though, this level doesn't have much going for it and is extremely forgettable, there's no other way to put it. The one cool thing about this that some people might not know is that if you're already a member of the Rat King Covenant before you enter into this area, then a lot of the enemies that reside within won't actually attack you, which is highly appreciative as those rat enemies can be awful. The last thing to speak about before we move on is the thankfully optional boss of this area, the Royal Rat Authority. Just an absolute garbage fight with the only saving grace being that there's a bonfire right outside. Otherwise it's just a gamble of whether you can kill the rats without being inflicted with toxic. If you can, then you're pretty much golden, as the main boss is just a monstrosity beyond words, whose fight is a cakewalk when it's one-on-one. In retrospect, it's hilarious how they made two rat bosses, both equally as bad as each other but for reasons that's very different. One is a pathetic joke that you have no challenge or trouble with whatsoever, whilst the other is basically a Russian roulette where you'll have to keep trying for the first 10 seconds to get past in order to stand a chance in the actual fight. Well, with that out of the way, it's time to enter the actual meat that the next area has on display. Brighstone Cove Tseldora. It's the arachnophobe's nightmare. It's also an area that I've always had the bare minimum of fun exploring. That statement might give off mixed feelings, so let me say it like this. I enjoy the intricacies of this level and its level design. The way the area connects itself together in interesting ways was awesome to play through. Some parts of the area are particularly tricky to get to, but that makes it all the more worthwhile in my experience. The elements of the area that I don't really enjoy are the enemies, literally almost everything to do with them. This isn't just the arachnophobic side of me speaking. There's just a ridiculous amount of chaos occurring at all times. We're lucky if there's less than 5 spiders in a room at a single given time. Sometimes they're just taking the mick, the sheer absurdity of enemies crammed into one single space. Take this room with the bonfire for example. Right after you wake up, there's like 10 spiders that are ready to pounce on you. Hey, at least Ornifex is here, right? Well, good luck trying to trade or even interact with her, because you have to damn well nearly clear out the entire vicinity before you can have a chat. There's more instances of it in this very level, and it makes the exploration extremely frustrating. At least the pacing of this level is pretty great. An appropriate amount of time is left in between getting to the area and getting to the boss, the Duke's Dear Freya. Never mind, it decided to chuck in a boss not even 5 minutes after exploring the start of the level. Well, let's have at it. What the hell is this? This isn't even a boss, it's a damn room full of regular enemies. Yeah, another instance of the team placing a fog door and putting a boss health bar on a bunch of enemies for no reason. This one might be the most egregious of them all. The lore for them is pretty cool, I'll give them that, but this guy's also got some pretty cool lore. But they didn't give him a bloody boss health bar, did they? It's incredibly lazy and out of place, but I'll take the free souls I guess. After exploring the rest of the area, you're finally face to face with the last old one, the Duke's Dear Freya, who happens to be a twin-headed arachnoid. It's a pretty slick design, not grotesque enough to make me wince and recoil, but badass enough to make me look in awe. Functionally, the boss works similar to the Flexile Century, where only one side of the monster will be attacking you at a time, so you'll have to strategize around that. They also decided to be annoying and add a bunch of spiders into the arena for you to contend with as well. Thankfully, holding a torch frightens them and leaves you in a 1v1 with the main threat. Overall though, it's a good fight, similar in quality to the other old ones, not you. And caps off, for my journey, the first half of the game. We've finally gathered the 4 Old One's souls and are able to pass through the Shrine of Winter. After the Lost Sinner, you can pretty much tackle the old ones in any other order. Even the Lost Sinner herself could have been done at any time. The non-linear design was widely adored and respected, but after amassing the 4 required souls to pass through the Shrine of Winter, the path ahead becomes quite straightforward from there on out. Drangleic Castle serves as a pivotal location in the game's storyline, representing the culmination of the player's journey up until this point. The presentation of this area, especially the path leading up to it, is spectacular. The vibrant greenery says its farewell as you pass by it, and suddenly it just becomes another regular day in England. No, but seriously, the drastic change in scenery can be rather imposing and definitely instills a sense of foreboding as you carry on to get to that epic lead up to Drangleic Castle. Meeting the Emerald Herald and just staring onwards at the castle whilst being drenched by the rain, you get the feeling that the area will be something special from the get-go. But before we actually enter the castle itself, this area was keen on introducing its main gimmick to us, that being the animated statue enemies. Enemies that just appear to be lifeless pieces of rock used to decorate the environment we're in, but can get the jump on the player rather quickly as they blend pretty well with the atmosphere and other actual statues. So it does provide a way to keep the players on their toes, and I won't lie here, I did get jump scared by them on my initial playthrough once or twice. I'll also be truthful in saying that as much as I did enjoy the gimmick, it did start getting old when you'd walk into a seemingly empty room with 3 suspicious looking statues. The scare factor kinda wears off. Another mechanic of this area that you're also introduced to at the start is the golems that acquire the souls of nearby enemies for them to allow you to progress onwards. These parts can be kind of tricky at times, as you'll need to lure enemies near the golems and get the kill there. Doing this whilst trying to juggle other foes can cause a bit of struggle. Dying before opening the main entrance to Drangleic Castle is a huge pain, as the Shrine of Winter did not provide a bonfire for the player, so you'll respawn all the way back at the Shaded Woods. Just a bit more pressure on the player's shoulders there. Trying to make my way into the castle on New Game Plus to finally obtain the Platinum Trophy was an extreme sport. Hands up if you relate. Onto the actual castle itself, the feeling you get when traversing through the lonely corridors is weirdly haunting. There's an unmistakable aura of decay and despair that hangs over Drangleic Castle, perhaps a reflection of the kingdom's troubled past and uncertain future. Dark Souls 2 does have an infamous reputation when it comes to ganks and how often they appear throughout the game, but I think this one room with the ruined sentinels has got to be up there as one of the worst. They put 6 of these fuckers in a single room. 6! I lost it the first time it happened, as doors just kept on opening, kill after kill before I just got trampled on, as if I just walked head on through the streets of bloody London. This castle is yet another area that houses 2 sets of bosses, but before we reach the first one, we have an especially chilling encounter mere moments prior as we encounter Nashandra, the Queen of Drangleic. This moment in particular stands out due to how unnerving it feels. The torrential sound of the rain immediately coming to a halt as you stand in the room to talk to her. The symmetrical view is separating us from her as she speaks in that calm and sweet yet spine-tingling voice. The whole encounter serves as great character writing and builds Nashandra, quickly reminding us of the lengths she is willing to go to in order to maintain her grip on power. Just after that ordeal, we swiftly move on to our first boss of the area, the Twin Dragon Riders.
You're joking. Not another one?
It's another unnecessary boss that doesn't complement the level in any way and is just there to inflate the number of bosses up. I will say that I don't find this fight particularly offensive or anything, it's just really unneeded. It seems there was some thought put into the battle at least, as at the start of the bout you're faced against one that's melee and one pushed up above sniping at you. It's a somewhat interesting dynamic to go up against compared to the laughably easy one-on-one bout over at Heide's Tower of Flame. You should even be aware whilst fighting against the Dragon Rider that's on the ground, as if you're not too careful, he can actually whack the platform that his partner is up on, causing the other to fall and consequently turning it into a more chaotic 2v1 on ground. This could be an issue, but I forgot to say that this fight is also pathetically easy once again, as the archer has barely any health, so opting for the 2v1 on ground is actually a quicker way to end the fight entirely. Reskins are usually in par taste, and this enemy appears about as many times as this guy from Yakuza 0. I like it more than the one-on-one fight though for some reason. Maybe it's because it lasts longer and has a bit more challenge and depth to it. I don't think anybody would notice though if a sudden patch came out tomorrow and this boss battle was removed from the game entirely. Not much of Drangleic Castle is left at this point, but whilst we're on the topic of reskins, why not have a round 2 with the Executioner's Chariot in a room that offers twice the challenge that the prior boss battle provided. Honestly, a lot of the remaining portion left has an off feeling about it, and I think it's the enemies. Not a single unique enemy until you obtain the key to the King's Passage. It may not seem that significant, but when you're already used to a lot of the enemies that stand before you, the fighting can lose some of its excitement, which is a shame. The last thing of note before entering is this elevator. God damn is it long. It genuinely rivals the elevator before Old King Alad in Demon Souls in length, and at least that one serves as some epic build up to the penultimate boss. What's even meant to be up here? Oh, I'll leave you to it. Well, even if the final bits of exploration were underwhelming, the boss at the end is anything but that. The Looking Glass Knight is one of Dark Souls 2's finest pieces of work. Firstly, its design is badass as hell, extremely visually appealing. It's clad in an ornate armor set that goes complementary to his lightning infused sword and comically large shield. The shield being what this boss is most well known for, as it renders any melee attack useless, making your positioning in the fight a lot more valuable. This is an aspect that I love about this boss fight, as it can switch up its attack depending on your positioning, forcing you to play with high awareness. Partway through the battle, the boss will slam his shield down and outbreaks a sidekick ready to assist him in battle. Online it summons another player, but offline it's just a basic ad that you should have no trouble dismounting. Even the presentation of the fight is stellar, with its extremely bombastic music set against a highly stunning backdrop. The atmospheric setting adds to the intensity of the fight and enhances the set piece to another level, capping off a strong transition to the base game's second half. After having completed the Grand Castle of Drangleic, the player descends into the Shrine of Amana, another one of Dark Souls 2's more notorious levels. The precarious terrain that can acquire sharp awareness, the lizard men that will ambush you if not careful, and most annoyingly, the dozens of spellcasters who fire homing sorcery at you every 5 seconds. A rare time where FromSoft actually nerfed an area post-release due to its difficulty. I can't say I was there to experience the Shrine of Amana pre-patched, but I have experienced it post-patch, and even now there are some times where I really struggle, so I can only imagine how bad it was on release. Throughout most of the game, I'm a melee user, but when it comes to this level, I may as well be a hybrid because I resort to using a bow just as much as I do my sword. It's extremely obnoxious trying to muscle your way through, as magic just homes in on you whilst you're also having to fight off those lizards, so having a bow just feels like the right way to go. It makes the level a lot more manageable, fairer and fun to play through. Even if you make quick work of the enemies in this level, there's another greater force that you'll have to battle with, and that's gravity. Honestly, it's not too bad, but it can come close and there are a few instances where you have to pay very close attention as to whether or not there's ground ahead of you, as falling to your death in this area can be one of the worst feelings in the game. Actually, screw that. Have you ever made it so far into this level only to die at a place where you know the next bonfire was coming up? If that's ever happened to you in this area specifically, yeah, we're here for you. We've been there. It's the worst shit ever. Despite me crapping on this level as a whole, I will say that once again the presentation is superb. Specifically talking about the non-gameplay elements, I love how the Shrine of Amana's atmosphere is a stark contrast to a lot of the dark and foreboding environments found elsewhere in the game. The area is bathed in the soft moonlight, casting a serene and tranquil ambience over the landscape. The shimmering pools of water that dot the area reflect the moonlight, creating a mesmerizing spectacle that adds to the level's otherworldly charm. That otherworldly charm being elevated further by the singing of the Milfinitos. It's almost like a lullaby that'll lower our guard as we navigate our ways through this hellish land ahead of us before we eventually reach the fog that hides the boss of this area. That boss being the Demon of Song. I find it very similar to the Covetous Demon. It's kind of a joke, but I just can't come to hate it, mainly because of its design. It's very intriguing. I mean, look at the damn thing. It's so fascinating yet unnerving at the same time, and it shows with its moveset. It's very unnatural in the way it swings its arms around and leapfrogs about. I say it's a joke of a boss, but truth be told, it can catch you off guard and deal a hefty amount of damage to your health bar. All in all, the Shrine of Amana and Demon of Song are both pretty bad, but get pulled up from the bottom due to their remarkable presentation that makes them stand out from the usual bland and boring areas and bosses throughout the game's run so far, and so on. Located right after the Shrine of Amana comes the Undead Crypt, a level that I feel goes severely under the radar when discussion for this game comes up. No one ever mentions it in a positive or negative light, it's just there, you know. Personally, I think it's a widely unremarkable area that doesn't completely offend the player in ways that the Shrine of Amana or the first part of the Iron Keep does, but doesn't really have much going for it, where they'll be brimming with joy when they reach this area. The Undead Crypt is another level where darkness comes into play, but unlike the Gutter or No Man's Wharf, I can't really say it does anything interesting with it. One interesting thing it does do is the bell ringing function, which essentially adds an extra layer to the area in a way. In some rooms there'll be bells placed somewhere that if hit by the player or an enemy will then go on to summon these Lydia pyromancers, who will make any combat encounter twice as difficult to handle. Another memorable part of the Undead Crypt is the encounter with the Grave Warden Agdane.
Halt. men do not produce light.
He definitely asserts his presence with no time to waste and makes sure you respect the area that is known as the sacred resting place for the deceased. Other than that, the level has some cool enemy encounters like these guys with the comically large double door shields, but the kicker has to be this guy who rings the bell in the last corridor if ignored. Troll software strikes again, they're on a roll right now, because if that bastard hollow does manage to set off the bell, good luck fending off the horde of pyromancers that you'll be encountering. Even past them you get to duke it out one last time with the Dragon Rider before travelling through the fog. Overall though, the Undead Crypt is a passable level with interesting quirks that unfortunately don't manage to make the level truly come to life. As the loyal protector of King Vendrick, Velstad, the Royal Aegis, stands as a stalwart guardian within the Undead Crypt, defending the sanctity of the tomb with unwavering vigilance. He is a great boss and just like the Looking Glass Knight, a standout for the base game of Dark Souls 2. His initial cutscene is great and it shows him eloquently sitting down staring ahead until he notices the player come through the fog, in which he gets up and readies himself for battle, spinning his hammer and posing menacingly. For real though, Velstad definitely has some aura about him that screams majestic and badass. His armor set combined with the sacred chime hammer looks so cool and refined, and that shows in his moveset. His movement and the way Velstad slightly charges up whilst he strikes and then pounces with high speed is epic and showcases his likely experience down in the tomb. One of the more notable things about this boss fight is the transition to phase 2, where he showcases his ability to channel dark energy, imbuing his attacks with additional power and adding in the ability to unleash devastating bursts of magic towards the player. It is undoubtedly a solid fight, but I can't say it doesn't suffer from a few questionable hitboxes here and there. Other than that though, it's one of the base game's best to offer. Once Velstad is defeated, his departure paves the way for you to finally meet the legendary King Vendrick, the man we've been tasked to find for ages and ages. Except when we do find him, no rather when we stumble across him, he's not emanating that legendary status that we once thought. Instead, players are confronted with a tragic and pitiful sight. Vendrick, once a mighty and revered ruler, now appears as a hollowed and emaciated shell of his former self, wandering aimlessly within the depths of the Undead Crypt. Visually, Vendrick cuts a misery-ridden figure, clad in tattered and overworn robes. His once proud and regal bearing has now been replaced by a hunched and defeated posture. His skin, pale and gaunt, and his eyes vacant and devoid of life, all of which reflect the toll that the undead curse has taken on this once powerful spirit. The tragic music as we wander in and the dragging of his mighty sword further emphasize his fall from grace, and all combine to create one of, if not the most powerful moment from Dark Souls 2. Whilst I'm on the subject, I may as well speak about his boss battle. It's extremely boring. I hate to say it, it's the truth. It's also draining as hell because he has a shit ton of health and is advised to be taken on after completing the memories of the giants, so as to have as quick and painless of a fight as possible. Because if you try to take him on right here and now, then sorry, but it'll be a long and grueling process. I still do like his boss battle though, as it fits perfectly with his character in the moment. It wouldn't really make sense if he came out running and swinging with breakneck speed. I much appreciate Vendrick as a character and for all he offers to the narrative at hand, and one day wish to make a video covering all about him because he's a phenomenal character. Once you do find Vendrick for the first time, you're also given access to the King's Ring, a highly important ring needed to access otherwise sealed off doors so you can progress, and the first of those being the door that leads to Aldia's keep. The same guy who's been jump scaring us at certain bonfires throughout our journey, yeah, him. But before you enter the keep however, if you've been keeping up with Lucatiel of Mira's questline, then you'll have your final encounter here, one that surely none of us have forgotten.
My name is Lucatiel. I beg of you remember my name, for I may not myself.
Once you enter Aldia's keep, you're greeted by the corpse of an enormous dragon, which is a powerful statement and says quite a lot about the person Aldia once was. And if that wasn't enough, then you'll definitely form an impression as you venture through the level and see the monstrosities that he has laying about. Some things do cause some confusion in this area, a big one for me being the developer messages actually. There are some where they'll warn you not to free certain NPCs or not to activate certain levers, but at the same time, there's messages telling you not to do the light puzzle, which rewards you with an item required for exploration. It's not something that's life or death when it comes to significance, but it was annoying trying to decipher which messages I should take into account and which I shouldn't. Aside from that, we see the return of a few Mirror Knights, which is terrifying on a first playthrough, but the main attraction is this long hallway at the end that's filled to the brim with all manner of chaos. Luckily they're caged, mostly. They can be released though, and it's comical how frenzied everything gets if you do so. Before we tackle the boss, shout out to the dragon I spoke about earlier that comes to life for one last epic jump scare before giving us the aforementioned key. Right before traversing through the fog, it's nice to take in the surrounding atmosphere. The gorgeous and vibrant view is a pleasure to bear witness to and gives the area a bit of extra personality towards its end. All in all though, Aldia's Keep actually does a decent job of separating itself from the pack. Well, at least in my eyes, but it certainly could have done more with the whole experimental aspect. But I shall not complain. Cool area, let's move on. Well, from one dragon to another, we enter the lair of the Guardian Dragon now. If you look at it and on first glance are thinking, hey, haven't we fought this thing already? It's because you have. It's the exact same dragon placed before the old dragons here. God, I've said dragon a lot. Well, not much has changed with this flying creature. His moveset is extremely basic, but this time he's got some aerial attacks in his arsenal to deal with. I hate to say it because I've said it about a dozen times this video, but it's generally such a middle of the road boss fight. It does nothing offensive, yet it also does nothing to stand out and make itself special. I'll say that the arena is somewhat cool. The cage theme adds that extra dagger to the madness that is Aldia. At least one cool thing is, if you slay the winged monster whilst it's airborne, it does give way to a unique animation as we say adios to the Guardian Dragon. I hope you didn't struggle with him because there's a few more of them coming up. With Aldia's Keep completed and out of the way, the next destination to venture onto is the Dragon Aerie, and wow, what an area it is. Perhaps the most atmospherically captivating level in the entire game. From the moment you step foot in this area, you're enveloped in a strong sense of wonder, of awe, of true astonishment as you become poised in place by your fascination, surveying the golden skies in front of you, listening to the roars of the soaring dragons, and walking onwards to see the plethora of them soaring freely in the open skies for the first time was an unmatched feeling. For a second, I felt the freedom that they had, but at the same time, that feeling of awe quickly becomes accompanied by a sense of caution and trepidation. The majestic presence all those flying dragons had in the distance also serves as a stark reminder of the formidable challenges that lay ahead. After taking in the unearthly atmosphere, you're greeted by the Emerald Herald once again, who bestows on you the Aged Feather, an unlimited homeward board that's incredibly useful. Upon further inspection of the level, you'll notice that there's an interesting zipline placed. A zipline that, conveniently enough, allows you to skip the entire area and move on to the next one, as there's no boss in between, which is unexpectedly awesome and something that you wouldn't expect from a game as punishing as this. However, it's not a bad level when it comes to exploration by any means, so I don't find myself taking that option a lot. Though, annoyingly enough, you do need to use a fragrant branch of yore to do any real exploration, which like you should have enough by now, but it's still a stupid design choice, let's be honest here. Other than that, there's almost a dozen crystal lizards to find, though it's nigh impossible to kill them all as you need to watch out for the eggs that are laying about. Eggs? What eggs? Well, there are dragon eggs laying about that are guarded by red dragons similar to the one we just fought at Aldia's Keep. If you happen to break an excess amount of them, then making your exit out of the area will prove troublesome.
Do not resist. The dragon welcomes you.
Sure mate, sure. Seriously though, that transition from the Dragon Aerie to the next area is unreal. I loved every bit of this area. Except these fuckers, they are just so unnecessary. But the set piece as you cautiously walk across that precarious bridge is unrivaled throughout the game and possibly the series honestly. It's just so good. The next area up is the Dragon Shrine, another extremely captivating level that has its own charm and character to make it a standout for sure. Upon getting the bonfire of this area, holy fucking shit! Okay, again. Upon getting the bonfire of this area, you immediately get a more civilized feel for this area. It serves as a sacred sanctuary for worshippers of the ancient dragon, a place of pilgrimage and reverence where the faithful pay homage to the creatures that once ruled the land. I love the way this area operates. You'll have encounters consisting of a Drake Creeper coupled with multiple other Dragon Knights who will watch onwards as you fight man on man with the hulking Drake Keeper to prove your worth. If victorious, the Dragon Knights will show their respect, remaining non-hostile towards you and even gesturing at times. But if you don't play by their rules and flee from the honourable duel, then be prepared for the onslaught of aggression about to come your way. Honestly though, there's not a lot of exploration to be done in this area. It's more of a key landmark that you need to run through, as getting to the end grants you a special item from the ancient dragon, whose gigantic imposing body definitely has a presence. That and the indecipherable sounds that come out of its mouth give it an extremely otherworldly aura. Damn, that was quite the glaze. Talking to it permits you the Ashen Mist Heart, which allows you to travel to the past a few times and access the memory segment of the game, which you can do straight after acquiring the item. Well, you can do that, or you can put yourself through hell and decide to fight the ancient dragon. Doesn't that sound like fun? Alright, that little bit of glaze I just did, don't worry, it gets taken back real quick because this fight absolutely reeks. The reputation for dragon fights in the Soul series up until this point isn't great. There's admittedly one banger, but a majority of them are hit or miss. But then there's the Ancient Dragon, which might be not only one of the worst dragon fights in the series, but just one of the worst boss fights in the series as a whole. My main gripe is that it's so boring and tedious. His health bar is unbelievably big. I legitimately thought that there was something wrong with my weapon the first time because each hit was about as significant as a paper cut. Not only that, but the Ancient Dragon's moveset is just not interesting whatsoever. Nothing stands out or makes me excited to play against it. In fact, that fire breath attack in which you have a fraction of a second to react to has got to be one of the most garbage but successful boss attacks in history, because I'd be surprised to hear whether a single player has ever avoided being hit by it at all. Each attack also deals a shit ton of damage, which makes the fight incredibly annoying if you don't walk in with 50 vigor. It doesn't help that the arena can force you into aggravatingly uncomfortable scenarios where you're sometimes guaranteed to die thanks to the way an attack of his can come out. The runback does the fight no favours whatsoever either, as it's really tedious having to kill the Drake Keepers in order to have a chance of getting back. It's just overall an extremely poor boss with nothing exciting at all other than possibly his music, but maybe that's because I've heard it a million times. Killing the giant dragon does contribute to lowering Vendrick's attack and defenses though, but honestly it's not needed and definitely not worth it. Thank the heavens that it's optional. But the ancient dragon does indeed cap off an extremely exciting pair of areas as we now backtrack a bit into the past. In order to defeat King Vendrick, who I've already spoken about, the player needs a few giant souls. There is a total of 5 to collect in this game, one being to killing the ancient dragon, another located in the Black Gulch after defeating the 2 highly intimidating giants that accompany it, and the other 3 from the remaining memories in the game. The more souls you get, the weaker Vendrick becomes, so ideally you'll want to collect all 5 before your bout with the Withered Lord, though it's not the worst if you duel him with 3. The memories can be accessed by interacting with the bodies of these overgrown giants all the way back in the Forest of the Fallen Giants. It's awesome and a cool way to implement it, as earlier on in the game you could interact with them but nothing of note would happen, but it would just fuel your curiosity. The memories themselves each have a time limit of how long you can be in them before you get kicked out. I kinda wish this wasn't the case so I could explore freely, but I never end up getting kicked out, so I actually can't complain here. Once you get sent back in time however, you're instantly ensnared by the chaotic battlefield. Foes at every turn and all manner of monstrosity out to get you. What's awesome and always cool to see is the enemies attacking each other. It'll always add that extra layer of engagement, watching their health bars lower from one another. The only mandatory memory is guarded behind a door inaccessible without the King's Ring. It takes you straight into the thick of things and it's a sight to behold. The area is very chaotic with cannon fire, explosions and the roars of giants creating an intense atmosphere. The sense of urgency and destruction is palpable, making it one of the most dramatic and action-packed segments in the game. It's beyond this where one of the final bosses of the base game lies await, the Giant Lord. The fight on paper is actually quite terrible, a cramped space with a horrible camera, but I can't say I hate the fight, it's got charm to it. The ensuing battlefield with everyone fighting one another as we sprint past all of it to get to the leader of the giants feels epic as hell. It gives some serious movie vibes and instills heavy main character syndrome in me, which is literally the case, I don't know why I said that. The gameplay of the fight is nothing special, it's the very first fight in the game but he's dripped out and has a sword. The camera isn't the best and can often lead to situations where you struggle to tell when the attacks are coming out, but at least he doesn't have an abnormal amount of health to make the boss fight a snooze fest. Admittedly it's very easy and most players will probably struggle more with the run up to the boss instead of the actual boss itself, but I have a soft spot for the epic presentation the Giant Lord has to offer. Also the reveal that he's the last giant will never not be awesome, and you realise that cutscene all the way back at the start where the last giant is furiously running at you has a lot more meaning. Now that we've dismantled the Giant Lord and already spoken about the Vendrick boss fight, there's only the final bosses left to clear before we finish the game. However, there's one more optional quest left to tackle, and that's the Pilgrims of the Dark Covenant. Unlike the other covenants in the game, which can be leveled up mainly via PvP, the Pilgrims of Dark Covenant can only be progressed exclusively via PvE. You see, through various sections in the game, you may or may not have stumbled upon this old man, Dark Diver Grandel, who happens to be the curious leader of the Pilgrims of the Dark. You find him at 3 separate locations, once in the Shaded Woods, another time in the Black Gulch, and an additional time beneath Drangleic Castle. Once you speak to him the 3rd time, you get access to the Covenant and subsequently to the 3 Dark Chasms of old. The chasms themselves are fragmented remnants of the Abyss, filled with darkness and powerful enemies, making them more akin to gauntlets, but upon completing your final one, you are given special access to debatedly the best non-DLC boss of the game, Dark Lurker. These chasms can be tough though, because the enemies aren't any old schmo. They're practically NPC styled encounters, sometimes multiple at once, and can really test your patience for a reason I'll mention momentarily. Well, like I said, upon completing your 3rd chasm, you are thrusted straight into the deep end with the Dark Lurker boss fight. This boss absolutely rocks. It's formed resembling some sort of heavenly entity with an unnatural amount of arms as well as wings sprouting from out of it. The shock I had for the first time when I wanted to make my exit from the 3rd Dark Chasm, expecting to be sent back to Dark Diver Grandel, only to be met with this, I guess it really was a dark lurker, huh? It is certainly one of the most difficult fights up to now, with its moveset being comprised with a lot of dark magic and pyromancy, explosions and projectiles that require precise rolls to avoid. He even has sword slashes and thrusts to add to that, and can teleport, emphasizing extreme awareness on our end. If that wasn't enough, halfway through the fight, it splits into two and the tensity of everything gets elevated tenfold. Now, you see this for the first time and just think, oh man, the fight's over, they've somehow managed to ruin this. But that's not the case. The gank here is actually awesome for once. The 2v1 is bloody brilliant and handled really well. Firstly, if their bodies coincide, then you can get double the damage done. And secondly, their movesets rarely ever disrupt one another in a bullshit way. It's usually pure strategy when you get your hits in and when to back away. Even the outside elements are fantastic. The brilliant visual design I've already mentioned, but the music also is amazing. It strikes a sort of mischievous and curious chord and makes you want to engage in the fight to figure more about what this being is. Whereas the arena, also great, makes you feel isolated and alone upon initial entry when you're dropped into it. The only negative I have with it, and it isn't even about the boss fight, but it gets really hard to separate it as an issue, is the punishment for dying. Firstly, each try requires a human effigy and potentially a flame butterfly, as you have to recomplete whichever dark chasm of old you want to attempt the dark lurker at. This is kind of whack, to be honest, as it's just never been a thing before where you have to need an item to attempt a boss. And I can only imagine how much of a nightmare it makes for challenge runs where you'll be attempting the boss like a billion times. The second thing is that yeah, you have to recomplete the whole damn chasm to attempt the dark lurker, which means killing all the enemies in it every time you want to have a crack at the boss. It's not even a case of running past or killing a couple, you have to kill all of them, which is ridiculous and painfully time consuming, and it also really demotivates you from wanting to attempt this boss on subsequent playthroughs. It's such a shame too, because you can just tell from the fight itself how good of a boss it is. Even the process of getting to it is great, but having to repeat it every attempt is such a brainless decision. It just hurts my soul. Give me that, you old bastard. Let me out of here. Leaving the final bosses for the end of the video, everything else has been felled, and that leaves us with only the DLC left to go. If Dark Souls 1's DLC was any indication, then the DLC we'd get for this game should be a step up in every aspect, and boy does it live up to that standard. Most of it anyway. Each DLC, yes there are 3 shockingly, we got was excellent and made the Dark Souls 2 experience much more whole and exciting, as they featured better bosses, areas, weapons, so on and so forth. They all culminate together to create what is now known as the Trilogy of the Lost Crowns. All 3 of them feel distinct from one another with clear-cut differences in visuals and theming. I love that they did this, as it's just an easy yet surefire way to ensure a unique and memorable experience in each of them. The first DLC for Dark Souls 2, named The Crown of the Sunken King, was released on July the 22nd of 2014. It, along with the other 2 DLCs, were regarded as pretty remarkable additions to the game, offering players a rich and challenging new environment filled with intricate level design and formidable boss fights. So let's talk about them. The first area players are taken to in this DLC is the ancient submerged city of Shulver, initially titled Shulver Sanctum City. It's a fantastic area, making itself stand out right from the get-go, as we see this dragon almost camouflage in with the background suddenly awaken, roar and fly away, making us know that this DLC means business. I don't want to sound like a twat, but this level really does feel like a return to form for From Software, specifically when it comes to level design. The base game had its awesome levels, but it mainly stemmed from the atmospheric beauty and brilliant presentation, whereas here there's the brilliant atmosphere, the awesome presentation, and the great level design to push it to the top. Every playthrough that I do of this area is a genuine blast to explore. They rarely nail the puzzle aspects in these games. I'll admit it's mostly just alright and doesn't really push the area in a positive light for me, but in this area particularly, it does exactly that. The obelisks that act as switches which you can interact with by either hitting or shooting at them are great fun and lead to extremely rewarding and satisfying moments when you manage to reveal something through their use. The Sanctum soldiers are also great and contribute to my enjoyment heavily, as they're very fun to fight with and test your weapons on. The area doesn't last long though, as a brilliant bridge transition from that terrifying winged creature clears our path as we move straight into another level. To be honest, I'm not sure if I just bunched them in together, but it's whatever. Not like I'm doing a ranking of the levels, so I don't have to worry about that for now. But swiftly moving on to the Dragon's Sanctum, an area where there's a lot more going on. For one, there's the spectral Sanctum Knights that linger about. Anybody else think that they were a phantom for the first time around and then shit themselves when they started attacking? To defeat them, you gotta break the bodies on the altars nearby to return them to their physical form, where you can easily beat the... well, fuck me. Yeah, did I mention this area is pretty dang tough. These Sanctum Knights are very tanky and can have a flurry of attacks that can obliterate you in an instant. Oh yeah, they're usually not alone. This one room in particular is obnoxious as all hell. It genuinely feels like a cat and mouse game where you're rotating between roles. The puzzles continue and can sometimes get pretty dang tough to figure out, but with enough perseverance on YouTube, you'll get it done. This one section all the way at the bottom feels especially interesting. Walking into it feels like a breath of fresh air and freedom. The beauty of the serene and shallow water, complemented by the formation of rocks all around, provide for a scenic and tranquil moment of peace. For about 1 second, until you notice the monstrosities that lie moments away from you. They remind me of the dragon asses from the Lost Isolate, except to a much smaller degree of course, and they're now made for proper battle. They're so goofy, I actually kinda love it. What are they called? The Imperfect? Yo, that's a badass name, I can't even lie. After a while of exploration in this level, it's finally time to get to the boss fog and kick some ass. Wait, hang on, wasn't the last bonfire quite a while ago? Don't tell me it's going to be another shitty run back. Except, truth be told, there's a bonfire right nearby, but it's so poorly hidden because there is no way anybody is finding this without a message or guide of some sort. Other than that, I really enjoyed my time with this pair of levels. It really felt like something akin to The Legend of Zelda, and is truly a one-of-a-kind experience that From Software have crafted even up to the year 2024. The first of the 3 bosses of this DLC I'll be speaking about is Alana, the Squalid Queen. From what I've seen and read online about her, she gets pretty mixed reception from the fanbase. On one side there are those that hate her, but on the other side there are those that really enjoy her. I fall on the latter side as one that has a great time with the fight. Alana is a powerful necromancer, and a lot of her fight utilizes magic and her ability to summon. This can be a recipe for disaster majority of the time. That controversial ability to summon is only amplified when you find out her options are a couple of pigs, a few annoying skeletons, and freaking Velstart, a whole extra boss, which is such a power move, I can't even lie. This creates a lot of RNG in the fight because, well, the options for her summons are like the bloody hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby meme, for goodness sake. This coupled with the fact that she has pesky dark magic and fire exploding AoEs that can cause a lot of frustration, and I can't see the viewpoint of people hating her. For me though, I've never found it a huge issue. Even when she did summon Velstart, he didn't have much HP and could be juggled with her quite easily. Another thing I love about her is the music. It gives off such crazy and chaotic vibes that are only matched by her frenzied swinging on her halberd. She also has a chunky amount of health, so I don't plow through her with ease, meaning I spend a fun amount of time with the encounter. To the chaotic playstyle she forces you into, to her viciously taunting the player upon entering, I'd say that Alana, the Squalid Queen, is a great first boss of the DLC, and a great boss for the game as a whole. After defeating Alana, the game doesn't give you much time before you're face to face with the next boss, and that's Sin, the slumbering dragon. This whole place was built to worship this mighty dragon, but considering the track record for dragon fights in this game, let's see how mighty he really is. Wow, I get it now. For starters, that design is sick. Ancient in nature, but badass in person. His body, marked by greenish, poisonous sores, indicates his corruption, but at least he looks awesome whilst doing so. The moveset is great. He's got powerful physical attacks and dynamic aerial assaults that also showcase his poison abilities in deadly fashion. The music, fantastic as ever. I can't really say that they ever miss when it comes to the score, and here it's perfect. Explosive yet majestic. It really pulls off the "I found an ancient dragon at the very bottom of a submerged kingdom" sequence. Sin is one of my favourite bosses of Dark Souls 2. He has pretty much got it all, from the awesome design, to the bombastic score, to the well fleshed out moveset, and even the sick looking introductory animation. My only negatives I have would be that the hitboxes can be quite a bit bullshit at times. I can only pray for those of you who do challenge runs of this game on the regular. My other negative, which can be more of a nitpick, is that when I'm fighting him, bringing in repair powder is almost always a necessity, as his body is corrosive as all hell, which gets pretty annoying, but isn't something I can complain about too much, since he more than makes up for it in every other department. You also obtain the crown of the Sunken King Helm after Sin's defeat, but I'll speak more of that once we complete the trilogy of the Lost Crowns. Before we wrap up our first DLC for good, there is but one more area left for us to tackle, and that's a smaller area known as the Cave of the Dead. An interesting thing that Dark Souls 2 tried doing with their DLC was making co-op areas. Levels that include a starring bonfire and an optional boss at the end, the middle being a clusterfuck of enemies to deal with. These levels were made with the intention being to play through them with summons or other real players. You are also able to be summoned to these levels if you don't own the DLC, for those playing with just the base game. Perhaps a way to see if you really want to purchase it. That's a great idea when you think about it, but Every single co-op area they made was straight up garbage, and in my opinion only got worse as the DLC cycle went on. It's mindless fun fighting the enemies together, sure, but the actual level designs of the areas are not interesting whatsoever. I'll speak on the other co-op areas in their respective sections, but the Cave of the Dead is extremely bland and uninteresting for one, and the layout is just a claustrophobic and maze-like mess where it's extremely difficult to tell one path from another. This makes the run back to the boss abundantly confusing, as it is very common to get lost since the aesthetic is so cut and dry that each corner looks the same. And that's not even mentioning the half a dozen enemies you'll be faced with at every turn. Well, let's see if the boss is even worth half the trouble of going through the area to make it to. This isn't real, this isn't real, this isn't real. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, your reward for journeying through the most dreary, maddening area is a triple NPC gang. I think the title of laziest boss design can only go to these guys. They really just threw Alva, Lucatiel and Havel into a room, put 3 separate health bars on them and called them a boss. And in a DLC that players paid for with money. Like, there has to be some type of disrespect in a way. It's an unbelievably lax approach to a boss. Not only that, but they added petrification spitting statues and even a moving petrification statue at the bottom of the arena. And the bottom of the arena is filled with slow moving water. Like, there's no redeeming features of this boss. The only argument that can be conjured here is that it was made with the intention of using summons in the fight, in which case, sorry, but that's just a sad thing to hear from me. Having to essentially triple your firepower in a way impossible for yourself just to take on a boss is just poor design, simple as that. This fight is just a horrible exercise where you're running in circles around the arena, getting in hits every now and then until it becomes a 1v1 where you can batter the last NPC and call it a day. What a shitty thing to add to a DLC, and I can't say the co-op areas in the other DLCs are much better. One of the worst areas and bosses in the entire series. With the first of the Lost Crowns trilogy down, now it's time to move on to the second of the 3, that being the Crown of the Old Iron King, which was released just over 2 months after the first, dated on August the 26th of 2014. I see a lot of people online split about which of the 3 DLC are their favourite, which is fair as they're all extremely well made for the most part. It also generates a ton of interesting and meaningful discussion amongst fans, which is always great to see. But I'm here to end it. The Crown of the Old Iron King DLC is the best one by leaps and bounds. It isn't even close. Nah, but in all seriousness, FromSoft cooked up some heat in their second DLC as we get taken to Broom Tower, which serves as our primary location for a majority of this DLC's runtime. In the first DLC, the main theme of it was poison, but in the second one, it is fire, which is very evident as it's utilised highly effectively throughout playing. Let me tell you about Broom Tower first though. It's a fantastic level and one of the game's best without a doubt. This tower, a colossal and imposing structure, is filled with dangers and is intricately designed to test the skills and patience of players. You see where we have the puzzle switches in the Sanctum City? Here in Broom Tower, the main gimmick are these ashen idols that can apply various different effects depending on which idol you've run into, such as being able to buff nearby enemies or darken your surroundings whilst applying the curse effect to the player. They can be really frustrating to deal with if you're the type of player that just rushes into areas without a second thought. But I feel like this DLC does teach you pretty quickly that caution is your best friend due to the fact that enemies can spawn unexpectedly from the snow in the ground. That should put you on the right foot straight away. The enemies in this area can be really tricky to deal with, even when playing cautiously. From the regular Ashen Warriors that can more often than not surprise and overwhelm you, to the cask runners that can play into other hazardous elements in the area to pose a significant amount of risk. And most dangerous of all, the big Iron Warriors, who are very scary to go up against as they force you to be vigilant and on your toes. To be honest, I can see how bad its overwhelming nature can be for players, and it's fair if you dislike it due to the excessive ganks. It seems Dark Souls 2 can't run away from that issue. I've just never had too much of a problem with it in this DLC personally. That could also be because I utilise my bow to the nth degree to pull enemies away from one another. Well, let's ignore the gameplay for a second because can I talk about the aesthetics and visuals? Oh my goodness, this area is nothing short of breathtaking from the moment you enter. This section at the start where you're standing atop the tower, walking across from the chains, is pure artistic brilliance. It really feels like a living painting. And hey, they didn't do too bad of a job at recreating it in Elden Ring after the Fire Giant. The exploration and level design is amazing as well. I love areas that implement verticality into its identity, and that's a large focus of Broom Tower when you get the elevators activated and are able to traverse up and down through the level to reach different sections of it. One smaller thing that I love are these tiny ashen figures on the ground that sometimes can give loot when you run over and destroy them. Just a little reward for those that love to explore every nook and cranny of a level. Everything about this area absolutely absolutely rocks, and I always have the utmost fun playing through it, which is a hilarious contrast from the last area I spoke about. From talking about one of the worst bosses in the game to something that's the complete opposite. Once you make your way all the way to the bottom of the tower, similarly to the Sanctum City, another boss lays waiting upon your arrival. The Fume Knight is widely regarded as one of Dark Souls 2's top tier bosses, and for good reason. Combat with the Fume Knight is a masterclass in game design. He wields two formidable weapons, a longsword and the massive Fume Ultra Greatsword, requiring players to adapt to his diverse attack patterns. It's tricky but extremely riveting once you get down to it. The Fume Ultra Greatsword being such an iconic weapon that I bloody love, man. The fight is divided into two pretty distinct phases, each presenting unique challenges. In the first phase, his dual wielding attacks demand precise dodging and strategic conservation of stamina to ensure you're not caught out of breath when he goes on the counter. As it transitions to his second phase, the battle becomes even more tense, with him dropping his longsword to main the Fume Ultra Greatsword to start delivering devastating fiery blows. He's also able to force out magic projectiles, with some attacks similar to Velstadt, which makes sense with the lore. Lore-wise, he's extremely captivating. A former knight of King Vendrick known as Raim. He and Velstadt were also known as the left and right arms of King Vendrick until they fought. Raim lost and he was deemed a traitor. Honestly, it's incredibly interesting and some fantastic character writing that is on display, and even the fact that if you enter the boss arena wearing Velstadt's armour, he immediately transitions to phase 2 just adds that layer of complexity to his character. The music is fantastic as always, and the arena, shrouded in the remnants of Broomtower's industrial ruin, creates an oppressive and foreboding atmosphere that perfectly complements the fight. And if you explore Broomtower to its fullest before you go through to the boss fight, then you should have no trouble with the surrounding ashen idols that can prove troublesome otherwise by healing the boss. Also, the fact that the bonfire is so close to the fog gate is such an underrated thing about this whole encounter. Like, imagine a top tier boss like this with a garbage run back. I feel like unconsciously it would just knock a lot of points off of it for so many players. Wait a minute. After defeating the Fume Knight, you can consider yourself done with the DLC, technically, as you can then go on to collect the crown of the Old Iron King Helm, the second of the trilogy being done, a phenomenal area being capped off by a phenomenal boss. However, there are two extra co-op areas that the player can indulge in, one of them being the Iron Passage, and boy does it really highlight the arse in Passage. I don't even know where to start with this, but it's similar in quality to the Cave of the Dead. Instead of the nonsensical design, this time it's a nonsensical amount of enemies. Not that that element wasn't present in the aforementioned Cave of the Dead, but here it feels even worse because of how much it forces out of you. The ranged enemies in particular are just so apparent when actually trying to make your way through everything. They can even cast spells to slow down your movement. That's the biggest middle finger that they could have pulled, because the only ever thing you'd want to do in this area is beat the boss, and they made even getting to him a chore. Oh well, at least they kind of thought of that and designed an alternate route just to ease our lives a bit. Except the alternate route is just as bad as the main one. You know what, I know we have more of these areas coming up, so I don't want to speak much longer about this one. It's absolute garbage. Let's talk about the boss who's more fun than this. Well, the first co-op area rewarded us with the gang squad. What lies behind door number 2? Right, a reskin of a previous boss, what did I expect? Granted, in this case it's a pretty darn good reskin, I'll be honest. It's fair to hate it because a lot of players paid for this, so seeing a boss that you've already fought before be reused must have sucked when the DLC dropped. But at least there is some variance here. The change-ups in attack speed made for a surprisingly intense and thrilling battle. Sort of like having to relearn the Smelter Demon's moveset all over again, and it's actually pretty fun. After all the ranting I did about the preceding area, which also serves as the run back, an unfathomably painful one at that, which I'm at least doing a couple of times because of how challenging the boss is, I still really enjoyed the fight against the Blue Smelter Demon. I think there's something wrong with me. Let's move on. The next co-op area this DLC graciously decided to give to us is the memory of the Old Iron King. This one makes a bit more sense when it comes to its inclusion, but that doesn't make the level any more enjoyable because it's just so short. Yeah, it's so packed with a ton of Alon Knights. Yeah, these guys who made the first half of Iron Keep are living hell. Let's put them in again. They just make this area shit due to their unrelenting aggression and their need to chase you for the length of the level. This memory is different to the ones from the base game, as the enemies aren't preoccupied with the others. Instead, all the attention is on you, which sucks. There's just nothing special at all with this level, and the only thing worth of note is the boss, because at least that is definitely something special. Sir Alon is the final boss of this DLC that I'll be talking about, and man, let's talk. This guy is everything. One of the only concrete things I knew about Dark Souls 2 before I played it was Sir Alon, and he just emanated an incredibly powerful aura that I was so excited to eventually fight him. He's a fan favourite similar to the Fume Knight, and his excellence can be attributed to a myriad of things, but what I enjoy the most when it comes to the Honourable Swordsman is his mix of challenging gameplay, striking aesthetics and powerful music. His moveset is incredibly majestic, like watching a dancer perform on the big stage. It's difficult enough to have you second guessing yourself at every other moment. With his blend of swift attacks, delays, thrusts and charges, this duel feels intensely personal. Set in a beautifully tiled arena with the golden scorching view of the sky in the background, that all amplifies the one-on-one nature of the battle, emphasizing each other's honour and skill. His design is brilliant, with the knight wearing an iconic samurai armor set being paired with his eloquent katana. The music is also unmatched, genuinely a standout track in a catalogue as great and iconic as From Software's. It's such an incredible fight, man. It rewards players who show skill and patience, even granting a unique animation if you manage to beat the boss without taking any damage, proving an unparalleled sense of accomplishment, as well as a layer of cultural depth. It pains me to even mention it, but holy shit, the boss run is so bad. It is so bad. Like, actually bad enough to the point where it ruins the main boss fight for some people, which is an insane thing to say. It's so understandable as well though, because the boss is pretty damn tough and can definitely give players a run for their money, and it's such a shame because Sir Alon deserves better than that. Like, the Fume Knight has his bonfire right outside the arena. I wish something similar could have been done with Sir Alon. But ignoring that, this boss is an unbelievable encounter that does everything right and caps off an incredible DLC. With 2/3 of the DLC being completed, of course, that means only one remains. That being the Crown of the Ivory King DLC, which was released on September the 30th of 2014. Again, just over a month after DLC 2 and 2 months after the first DLC. So Dark Souls 2 fans were, they were kind of eating during this quick DLC cycle. The quality that each of these had was consistently great, and it doesn't fall here as Ilium Lois is an insane level on multiple fronts. The theme of the final DLC is ice, and it's so expertly used throughout the DLC's run. It's honestly insanely creative, and I think that goes for Dark Souls 2 as a whole. Despite all the controversial aspects of the game, its creativity when it comes to the areas is extremely refreshing. A lot of specific mechanics to specific areas that makes them feel unique and fun in many a way, and that's no different here. Ilium Lois is another one of the snowy levels that is universally regarded as one of Dark Souls 2's best areas, and I don't disagree. From the moment you enter, you have the choice to fight a boss straight away. The problem is that it's invisible for the time being, which makes it unsurprisingly really difficult, but I still feel like it's tradition to have at least one attempt against the boss. It never goes well, but at least I try. The other choice you have at the start is to actually explore Ilium Lois as a whole. This frozen city that was once a bustling kingdom now lies in ruin, buried under layers of snow and ice. Because of this, there are many instances throughout this level where sections or objects will be frozen in ice and can only be interacted with after further progressing through the level. An excellent choice when it comes to design of the area, as it gives Ilium Lois much more depth and character, whilst also keeping exploration constantly engaging and rewarding. DLC 3 is also a major challenge. The areas are just extremely tough to play through with a ton of hard sections to navigate. Honestly, it is one of the most rage-inducing areas because some of the enemies can be a pain. I'm looking at you, weird ice hedgehog dudes. Partway through exploring the level, however, and you should be able to find the Eye of the Priestess. This item essentially enables you to see invisible enemies around the level, and of course the boss as well, so let's get our revenge. Ava, the king's pet, is this giant white tiger that exudes a majestic presence, probably helped by the fact that he's titled the king's pet. I will say though that the icy spectral aura that emanates from his fur is a very nice visual touch. He can be a challenge even whilst visible, as he deals a hefty amount of damage with each attack and has a varied enough moveset that will constantly have you on your A game. Aggression is Ava's main trait, I'd say, which makes it particularly tough when it comes to finding opportunity to heal with his blend of pounces and ranged magic attacks. Ava in a way kind of acts like a skill check for the rest of Ilium Lois, and you'll definitely want to have a feel for his moveset if you're planning to take on every boss of this DLC, that's for sure. After defeating the King's Pair, you'll be granted an audience with Alsana, who melts the ice all over Ilium Lois, allowing for you to fully explore the area and everything it has to offer. And similarly to the start of the DLC, you can just go to the final boss right after meeting with Alsana. An ill-advised decision that would be, however, as the first phase of the fight is extremely tricky and tedious all alone. More on that soon, and you do have the alternative to explore Ilium Lois in order to find assistance. Exploring Ilium Lois once again is awesome though. Being able to unlock secrets that were inaccessible earlier feels very rewarding and really pushes the level in my eyes. I love the gimmick of coming back to the same area for a second time and seeing it from a whole new perspective. It's incredibly clever and fun when pulled off right, and that's exactly the case here. But the main objective of going through Ilium Lois now is to find all the locked up Lois Knights so they can assist us in our final battle against the final boss. However, getting to them isn't so straightforward. Damn, it's troubling trying to free these guys. I remember my first playthrough being invaded by castaway witch Donna. Oh my days, she was the bane of my existence for a while. I had an immense struggle trying to kill her on that narrow bridge with her extremely busted set of magic. And who can forget this cheeky bastard who becomes a flipping barrel and can ambush your soul away. Troll software striking hard and good. But seriously though, with all things considered, I think Ilium Lois has a strong case for the best level in the game. It really is a masterclass in atmospheric and visual design, rewarding exploration and having some amazing gameplay. The trio of main DLC areas, Shulver, Broom Tower and Ilium Lois are some of the most charismatic and strongest levels in the entire series in my opinion, and do so much to push Dark Souls 2's status as a whole. With everything being explored and all noteworthy pieces of content for this DLC completed, let's move on to the last worthwhile boss, the Burnt Ivory King. One of the coolest bosses and premises they've done for a FromSoft fight. His lore is amazing. He's this once revered and compassionate leader who surrendered himself to the old chaos for Ulsana. The Burnt Ivory King embodies the tragic hero archetype, and he offers players a battle that is both epic and emotionally resonant, which is also displayed through the music. Similar to So Alone, the score of this boss is a standout amongst standouts, and one of the most hype and powerful pieces they've made for a boss. The start of the fight has you alongside all of the Lost Knights you've picked up plummet into the old chaos in absolute badass fashion, where your team dukes it out against the Charon Knights. This part feels so cool and really feels like a different game. The encounter is so unique and fresh for a Souls game. It's similar in a way to the fight in Elden Ring, and it's a common trait in both which most people love about them. I will say though that if you do end up dying a lot to the boss, then this stage can get pretty tedious and frustrating because it seems like the Charon Knights are always more focused on you and they pack a mean punch. But as the fight progresses, the Lost Knights will sacrifice themselves to seal off the portals that are summoning enemies, which is where you'll be left to face off against the main man himself, the Burnt Ivory King. And as you watch him emerge, the set piece is just ridiculously awesome. Sometimes you'll have an ally remaining, but I honestly just let him get killed off because I find the boss being concentrated on you much easier than trying to recognize who his aggro is on. The fight itself is actually not too complex, but the battle is still thrilling, and he even enchants his sword and turns it into a freaking lightsaber. Dueling it out with him is intense, and the added pressure of having to do phase 1 all over again definitely puts the pressure on. Fighting it out with the stunning backdrop of the old chaos, the fiery hellish arena that starkly contrasts with the icy expanse of Ilium Lois is pure brilliance. Honestly, the Burnt Ivory King as a whole is another one of my favourite bosses in the game. His battle isn't just a test of skill, but a profound storytelling moment that encapsulates the themes of sacrifice, loyalty and the relentless struggle against darkness that defines the Dark Souls series. The gameplay combined with the storytelling, presentation, arena and music made the Burnt Ivory King a classic for Dark Souls 2. Once the fight finishes, you're done with the DLC and can pick up the final crown of the trilogy, the Crown of the Ivory King Helm, which alongside the other two apply some rather appealing effects if worn after certain events. You can visit the resting place of King Vendrick to travel into his memory and receive his blessing to activate the effects of the crown. The effects are sick and a well worth reward for finishing these exceptionally challenging DLC. I love all three of these DLC and I believe they were all incredible additions to the game that not only improved upon foundations that were already established but gave way to new heights that the series could reach, because wow, some of these areas and bosses were unreal. What a treat for fans, and I'm so happy to have experienced them. We'll ignore the corrupt areas, yeah, let's not speak on them. Wait, what? What's going on? Where am I? What do you mean I forgot to talk about an area? I would never do that! Huh? This place looks... Oh no. No. Wait! No! Yes, I didn't forget about the frigid outskirts, ladies and gentlemen. I just didn't want to sound that excellent end to the trilogy, as this is the most optional piece of content ever. And it's... something else entirely, but I guess I'll talk about it. Here we go. The last co-op area of the game, and it's arguably the worst one they've done. I'm being really light there as the frigid outskirts is widely reviled and just generally regarded as one of, if not the worst area in the Soulsborne series. Accessible via Ilium Lois, this gigantic snowy white blanket is known to be home of the exiles that were sent there by the Ivory King, which makes me wonder how nice of a guy was he really? Why the hell would you send anyone here? It truly is the ultimate form of torture, and I think low-key that FromSoft did the perfect job at conveying it to us, at the cost of creating the most hated area ever though. From the moment you enter the coffin that's used as sleigh-like transportation, to waking up and realizing that there's no heading back, you get this overwhelming sense of hopelessness. There are constant storms that repeatedly blind your vision and ensure that any attempt to make your way through this monochromatic expanse is an insufferable experience, and that's not even half the problem. There are very few landmarks and some hidden caves scattered throughout the area to provide brief refuge but do little to alleviate the overwhelming sense of isolation and disorientation. The main threat in this wank stain of an area comes from the reindeer, hence you may have heard the name Hearthfuck Valley mentioned a few times in the community. These fast and powerful enemies appear randomly out of nowhere from the blinding snow, often ambushing players from any direction due to their unpredictable spawn patterns. The combination of poor visibility and the reindeer's aggressive behaviour makes each encounter extremely difficult to manage. They're tanky as fuck and have movesets large enough to put some regular bosses to shame. They're one of the most hated enemies in the series, and for good reason, but it's a shame because they're low-key kind of cool in design and moveset. It's just that they're way too overtuned and presented in situations where your back is always to the wall. Adding to the frustration is the lack of bonfires, meaning death often results in a long arduous trek back to where the player died. This just makes any semblance of progression feel slow, punishing and downright impossible. It's the only area where I actually use summons to just help me get to the boss fog. Hopefully the boss is alright though, the last two co-op areas had some surprising bangers. So get this, the boss is a reskin of a boss that was already a thing previously in this DLC, and there's two of them. Wow. There's nothing to even talk about regarding the actual boss, we've already fought the damn thing. It's hilarious how Zalin can even buff itself and also regenerate its health slowly, as if they thought that there wasn't enough madness already going on with this fight. The boss itself isn't even that bad, but you can't just ignore the runback for this. You can't. With Solon, I could excuse it, but here, nah. The runback single-handedly puts Lud and Zalin as one of the most miserable and rage-inducing boss encounters in the entire series. With every area and every boss out of the way, that leaves us with one last location to visit before we get to our final bosses and finish the game. It's been one hell of a ride with so many ups and downs, so many highs and lows, the peaks being some of FromSoft's greatest accomplishments, while its blights remain as some of their most questionable content produced. Our final location takes us on a trip to the Throne of Want, an area with not much to talk about. It includes a long run up to the main attraction, which primarily serves as the arena for the game's final bosses and ultimately the final choice that determines the player's fate. It's also located within Drangleic Castle, well to the left of one of the bonfires where you need the King's Ring to access it. On a separate note, man, does anybody find it mildly annoying how you have to equip the King's Ring each time you want to proceed into the Throne of Want? Can the damn thing not just stay open? I mean, come on. You also get your last piece of dialogue with the Emerald Herald, in which she reveals the true nature about herself. Honestly, I couldn't care less because she was a very boring level up maiden compared to her counterparts. But without further ado, let's proceed through the fog and fight our final enemies. Yes, I said enemies, as it's not a one and done fight. We have multiple, including a gank to start us off. The Throne Watcher and Defender fight is certainly an interesting fight with a lot of variables to be aware of. Well, firstly, they aren't a cakewalk in any sense. They deal a significant amount of damage with each attack and can sometimes coordinate their assaults very well to put a lot of pressure on the player. They can also buff their weapons, and you need to be aware to manage their health bars carefully, as taking one down whilst the other has a large percentage of life left is a bad move. You need to gradually get hits on the two of them, similarly to the Witches of Hemwick or the second phase of the Twin Princes, as otherwise one of them can revive the other to full health, creating a frustrating cycle for the player. The gank itself is nothing of note. They don't do anything interesting with the arena, and the Watcher and Defender seem to have equal speed and aggression, so the balance isn't really there. I'll say that they don't have a ton of health though, so it's not a slog to go through. For a Dark Souls 2 gank, I'd say it's surprisingly good and interesting, but the game doesn't end once you beat them. No. Once you defeat the Overseers of the Throne, in swoops Nashanja ready to take you out. Her cutscene is a perfect encapsulation of her character, power hungry and cunning. The black bars are a nice cinematic touch, though they're blocking half her head, so I don't know how intentional they even were. It's also cool how there's an alternate cutscene depending on whether you wait after defeating the Throne Duo or enter the fog afterwards, something I had no idea about. The fight itself is rather easy and straightforward. Nashanja wields a powerful scythe whilst also employing dark magic, summoning orbs of dark energy which inflict heavy damage and curse the player. Her melee attacks are slow but powerful, requiring the player to be on their toes to not get caught off guard. The dark orbs she summons create hazardous zones that must be avoided to prevent being overridden by the curse build-up. To be real, I just tank the curse as it barely does nothing in this game. Imagine it was Dark Souls 1, then you'd be in trouble. Nonetheless though, I do like the inclusion of the curse element. It fits with Nashanja and her design. Speaking of which, I must say that the design is sick, a menacing skeletal figure shrouded in dark energy. One of my favourite designs that we got from Dark Souls 2. The music is also really fucking good. A haunting track that suits the fight incredibly well. One of my highlights from the game. Overall, it's a fight that, whilst not being one of From Software's best conclusions compared to some of the others, it is one that is pretty memorable in design, music and sequence. It really could have benefited with some added difficulty though. The gameplay is just not all that and leaves a lot left to be desired. That would be the end of a regular Dark Souls 2 playthrough. However, in Scholar of the First Sin, we have another boss to fight after Nashandra, making this kind of a gauntlet in some way. One underrated thing is that you don't have to continuously fight them one after another each attempt. They did get that right at least. Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin, is the true final boss of this game. He was also included in the regular Dark Souls 2 game after the patch. He is technically optional if you don't kill King Vendrick, which is interesting, but most players are going to kill all the bosses, so here we are. The Aldia boss fight was a chance for the dev team to really go all out with a bang. Nashandra, whilst being decent, isn't really the boss people want when they're finishing up their journey. So let's see what Aldia has. Well, hats off to you guys, you've somehow managed to create an even shittier concluding fight to the game. Aldia doesn't engage in traditional melee combat, but instead relies on using his strong spells and AoE attacks. He periodically teleports by sinking into the ground, only to reappear elsewhere, requiring players to stay mobile and adapt quickly. This sounds somewhat cool, but the main problem is that he's protected by a fiery shield in a way that mitigates almost any damage you try and muster up against him, whilst also quickly damaging the player. The fire only goes once he reappears from teleporting, and only for a few seconds at that, so your window to attack is very small. The whole fight just reeks of tedium and is incredibly boring and a disappointing end to the game. In a similar vein to Nashandra, the music is at least very good, but everything else sucks ass. It hurts even more when you realise that they had the chance to make the final boss even better, but in my opinion turned out a whole lot worse than what they already had. Well, with that trio of encounters done with, we have officially tackled every area and boss that the game has thrown at us. Whilst some felt like a cakewalk that boosted our egos, others felt like the exact opposite and pushed us to the brink, pointing at our skills and having the largest laughs. But in the end, the one with the last laugh is always us, the player, and that's the true Dark Souls experience. Being able to best these games instead of them besting us. Knowing that we took on all manner of challenges they threw our way, and no matter how many times we were knocked down, we got back up and we kept fighting. We kept fighting and we won. Though if you skip the frigid outskirts, all power to you. I actually wish I had done that after this playthrough. Last but not least, the endings of this game. Dark Souls 2 offers two primary endings that hinge on the player's choice after defeating the final bosses. These endings do the standard good job in reflecting the series' recurring themes of light and dark, and the cyclical nature of the world's fate. In the first ending, our player, the bearer of the curse, ascends the throne of one, which kind of mirrors the ending of the original Dark Souls, where our character sacrifices themselves and succeeds Gwyn. The cinematography and music are cool and feel sort of ritualistic in a way which fits with the whole cyclical nature of Dark Souls, and the true events beyond the first ending only lie with us, the player. The second ending is only unlocked by defeating Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin. After the fight, Aldia offers the player a choice to reject the throne and the cyclical nature of the world. If the player chooses to walk away, they abandon the throne and exit the throne of one. Aldia speaks of a new path, one free from the cycle of light and dark, suggesting that we opted for a different fate. The camera pans out, showing the bearer of the curse leaving the throne behind and stepping into an uncertain future. This ending implies a rejection of the established order, leaving the fate of the world open-ending and suggesting the possibility of breaking the cycle. I like this ending a lot more than the first, as it emphasises the whole struggle against fate a lot better. Travelling all this way only to be unsatisfied with the outcome and journeying out to find another way is just a badass way to end things. Both endings are a great conclusion to the game nonetheless, and round off our Dark Souls 2 journey in excellent fashion. Now for some unskippable credits. Well, I took a goddamn while to make this video. Seriously, I was not prepared for its length to be this long. I just had too much that I wanted to say. It was a blast overall though, and I really adored speaking about each area, even the damn co-op areas. Dark Souls 2 is a fantastic game in a series full of phenomenal games. Sure, it has its lows, but at the same time it also has some of the highest highs. It's not my favourite of the Souls series by any means. It has its aspects that I love and hate, but it's always a fulfilling journey whenever I do play through the game. I don't think I'll ever not have fun playing through one of these games, unless I'm specifically out to torture myself. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thanks a bunch for watching my video, and if you somehow got to the end, then I appreciate you with every fibre of my being. If I got anything wrong about the game, I'm extremely sorry, do not hate me. Leave any comments, good or bad, discussing the video and Dark Souls 2 as a whole, I'm all ears. I've been your host Adobo. The next time you see me won't be nearly as long as this. Thank you all for watching my videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.